Hey, well, this is it. The full, completely finished, all-encompassing Four Souls tier list. A lot of this you've probably seen before, but I've made some adjustments here and there. I've linked these adjustments in the comments, so you can skip right to them if you've already seen all this. I totally didn't make this because YouTube loves long videos. No, I'd never do that. Anyway, let us begin. For the last time, every Four Souls item ranked. Our first item is Belly Button. Belly Button allows you to play more loot cards, mostly on your turn. Not only does it allow you to play one additional loot card on your turn, each time you take damage, your character card recharges. This means, in theory, you can play a total of 4 loot cards on your turn without dying. In addition to this, it allows you to recharge your character tap if you take damage in the off turn. Keep in mind, if you happen to be playing a character with an alternate character tap like Blind Johnny or Baba, the on-hit effect will differ. Playing an additional loot card each turn can help you gain more sense on your turn or just be more responsive. It's a totally average card, and it gets B tier. Bob's Brain is an item notorious for being very hit or miss in the video game, and in the card game it's no different. Each time an attack is declared, it will either deal a damage to a monster, a player, or you. When you're attacking a monster, most of the time you'd really appreciate anything that deals extra damage to it. With Bob's Brain, you have a 1/3 chance to do that, while 2/3 will mildly inconvenience other players or cripple your attack, both of which you usually don't want. Sometimes it might be of use to deal damage to another player, like if they have an Abaddon or playing as a low health character. Maybe you want to activate someone else's damage activated item for some reason, or maybe another player is at 1 health for some previous interaction, who knows? Most of the time though, just like in the game, this is a very hit or miss card, and it's likely to miss that hit. C tier. Breakfast gives you 1 extra health. Let's talk about stat boost items for a second. Stat boost items are always very powerful. In layman's terms, damage lowers the amount of hits you need to kill a monster, dice roll increases the chance you'll hit a monster, and health can increase the amount of times you can afford to miss. Health won't always save you, as some monsters can do enough damage to circumvent it, but health has another more supportive use than being a safety net. With extra health, you are much less likely to be a victim of off-turn damage. Most sources of off-turn damage do 1 to 2 damage. With 2 health, if you take damage from an interaction like Wrath dying, you could be bombed and die. But with an extra health, someone would need to use 2 bombs to kill you, or waste a gold bomb or mega bomb. Obviously there are other ways to die off turn, but having an extra point of health decreases that likelihood tremendously. This item, like most stat up items, gets S tier. Brimstone. Now we get to talk about extra damage. Like I said, having even 1 extra point of damage cuts the amount of successful attacks needed to kill a monster in half. If you only need half the rolls to kill a monster, you have much better odds of defeating it. Damage can also occasionally help you in player combat. If an average 2-1 player attacks you and misses, you'll kill him instantly, barring any loot plays. Likewise, if you attack an average player, you can kill him in 1 hit. Having an extra point of damage is always great. In addition to this point of damage, Brimstone makes you deal 1 damage to another player each time you land a successful attack. This means, in theory, if you attack a monster with greater than 2 health, you can kill a player every time you attack. Most people don't do this in the early to mid game because everyone's still pretending to be friends, but once late game hits, you can really wreak some havoc with this thing. Brimstone gets an S tier. Bumbo is a card that most of the time, to me, feels like a curse. Let's get the big issue out of the way first. You can't gain sense while you have this. For each cent you would gain, Bumbo gets a counter. If you are low on useful items, this is really not good. You cannot gain any cash to buy items or barter with players, which is really bad. Good items can make all the difference in this game, and without them, you can really fall short. If you have a good stack of items already, Bumbo can be quite a help. Remember the counters we talked about? Bumbo levels up with certain amounts of counters, allowing him to have different effects. With 1 counter, just 1, your first attack roll each turn goes up by 2, meaning you are at least 33% more likely to hit your roll, which in this game means you'll usually hit it. This can help you get a good first hit on higher roll monsters, and partners well with other first roll items, as a +2 dice roll is just nuts, even if it is for just 1 roll. With 10 counters, you get a full-on 1 damage up. I have already talked about how great damage ups are, so we'll just say this is fantastic and move forward. Lastly, if you can manage to collect 25 counters with this item, you can make as many attacks as you want on your turn. This allows you to, in many situations, tear through monsters with your increased stats and stop when it gets too risky. If you can manage to get to this point, this can be one of the best items in the game, but due to the fact that getting here is so difficult and this item has such a crippling downside, it gets B tier. Post-production Raider White Shear. Stealing and bartering technically does not count as gaining sense. You can gain sense that way. Whoopsie doodle. Still B tier though. Cambion Conception is one of those items that works best if you already have a decent amount of items. To be fair, due to how the game itself works, most items work better with more items to interact with. Anyway, when you take damage, the amount of damage you took is added to the item and counters. Once it has 6 or more counters, 6 are removed and you gain a treasure. That means if you hang on to this long term, you can net yourself an item or two. The thing is, holding on to this long term implies you have worse items to sacrifice when you die. Due to how long you have to hold on to this to get use out of it, this card may not survive long enough to gain its effect, and adding to that, you probably won't want this in the late game. One more quick thing to note, this item is vastly improved if you have a way to deal damage to yourself in a safe environment, or have some kind of health up. Anyway, B tier. Champion Belt grants you an extra point of damage for your first roll, which we've discussed already. However, it also grants you an additional attack on your turn. Having an additional attack grants you the possibility of killing 2 monsters on a turn if things line up well for you. Killing more monsters means more rewards, which can help you progress faster. It can also make it more likely you'll see a soul-having monster, as if you kill a monster and leave an empty slot, a monster with a soul could fill it, allowing you to attack it. Overall, just a solid card. B tier. Charged Baby is a good item, but only if you have a worthwhile active item to combo it with. If you don't, this item is nearly useless, unless you feel like giving your friendo free charges. Of course, you could charge him for the charges, taking charge of the less fortunate situation the game has charged you with. Charge. Charged Baby allows an item to be recharged every time a 2 is rolled. That means with every roll, you have a chance to recharge an item, which is quite useful. However, like I just said, this item requires you to have an active item worth recharging to be of use, so it kind of brings it down to B tier. Guilty as charged. Cheese Grater. Cheese Grater is known as a legendarily bad card, like almost iconically bad, like this game's version of the Wiz bad, even though there is an item named the Wiz that is much worse. I may not be the first to say it, but Cheese Grater isn't a horrible item. Whenever somebody rolls a 6, you reveal the top card of any deck to all players, and you may then discard it or leave it as it is. This gives all players information on future cards. You can use this to make the game smoother, or possibly throw away cards nobody wants to deal with. The issue is, this item barely benefits you more than other players. Remember, you have to use this when a 6 is rolled. There is no may or something that presents it as a choice. Cheese Grater is far from the worst item in this game, but it is below average. This gets a C tier. Curse of the Tower is an item nobody wants to see. With it, each time you take damage, you have a 50-50 chance of either dealing 1 damage to all monsters or dealing 1 damage to all players, meaning this is kind of an aggressive item. This item might lend itself better to the late game, as it does not directly harm its user, but definitely pisses off other players. Dealing damage to monsters is helpful, let's be honest, but that's not what this item is for. You can use it to make people prevent damage for you, or just use it to kill everyone. It's all around just a dickish item to buy, but as dickish as it is, it's an alright late game item. B tier. Side note, this item is horrid in the early game due to the inevitability of everyone hating you and nobody wanting to trade with you or help you out ever. Please stop buying this turn 1. Don't be a dickhead. Dad's Lost Coin is the poster child of good on-roll effect items. It states that when anyone rolls a 1, you can force a player to re-roll it. Rerolling any number is great, but due to 1's status as an overall epic fail is particularly useful. There are almost no monsters that take damage on a roll of 1, meaning that if you happen to roll a 1, which is nearly always inherently bad, it can be re-rolled. This item can also be used to affect other people, perhaps asking for some spare change each time you use it on them. Being able to both completely negate epic fails and alter other players' rolls, even if mostly for the better, nets this an S tier. Always go for this. Dark Bum, a card that most people stare at and think, well, that's not worth it, and they're usually right. At the start of your turn, you roll, and if you get a 1 or 2, you get 3 cents, which is okay. A 3 or 4, you get 1 loot, which is a lot better, but a 5 or 6 makes you take damage. Taking a damage at the start of your turn puts you in an immediate disadvantage. You're more susceptible to bombs, attacking things becomes much more risky, and you're overall just vulnerable. Risking this in return for a small amount of resource gain at the start of each turn is just super not worth it. The issue with this item, I feel, is that even though the positive outcome is more likely to occur, the risk outweighs the reward. 3 cents or 1 loot is not enough to offset a crippled turn, in my opinion. I'm sorry. Let's get to C tier. Dead Bird allows you to look at a player's hand and steal one of their cards when they roll a 3. Being able to look at a player's hand every time this happens is powerful enough, but being able to steal any loot card you want from them is just nuts. Using this can give you intel on what other players have, and can help you prevent them from making big plays. Dead Bird gets an S tier. It's just such a good support item. We've already talked about health ups. This has the same effect as the last one. S tier, yeah. Dry Baby is a card that can be of great use when the situation arises to use it. Dry Baby reduces all incoming damage to 1, which is useless when taking a single point of damage, which is most of what you'll be taking. However, if you happen to be attacking a monster with higher damage, this item really comes into handy, as the damage resistance will afford you more chances to hit the monster. It's not the most common situation to be in, but this item will help you out much more often than you might think. Add in that players who might try to kill you with high damage attacks like Mega Bombs or Weekend, you've got a pretty decent defensive item. B tier. Eden's Blessing seems like an underwhelming item, and given it kind of is. Gaining 6 cents at the end of your turn if you have none basically means that if you have less than 6 cents at the end of your turn, you'll be giving it to another player to cash in on that free cent gain. Having 6 cents at the end of your turn really isn't that great unless you have a paid item. I should mention, this item would in theory work super well with Bumbo, given that you can cash in all your cents before your turn ends to get enough to deal 1 damage in the off turn. If all you have to spend cash on, though, is items, you're basically making sure other players gain free cents for doing nothing, and committing to using a cent card on your turn so you can buy an item. Just not a super powerful item. C tier. Empty Vessel can be pretty useful, but can also be pretty limiting. With this item, having 0 loot cards in your hand gains you an extra point of damage, but this isn't really the stat we're looking at. Having no loot cards is almost never something you want to go for, so this stat kind of falls flat and remains situational. However, if you have 0 cents, you gain +1 to all attack rolls. This is the better stat, and better thing to have 0 of, due to the fact that you can just give away money at any time. As I have said, widening the window of opportunity is almost always the best move in 4 Souls. The issue with this is, of course, that you have to throw away all your money to gain this opportunity. To be fair, this is not the biggest downside in the world, and you could even make a deal with players asking them to hold on to your money and then give some back when the attack is done. With this in mind, I would say this item belongs in B tier. It has a very powerful upside with a price to pay, and a second stat that can be helpful, albeit rare to see in action. Eye of Greed is a card that nets you 3 cents when someone rolls a 5. It's one of the best items for gaining cents, depending on your luck, and can help you afford more items or barter more. I have nothing else to say about it, just a solid item. B tier. Fanny Pack allows you to loot 1 every time you take damage. I shouldn't have to tell you that you'll take a good amount of damage over the course of a 4 Souls game, because if you've played one, you probably already know that. Fanny Pack will consistently increase the amount of loot cards you draw, and in addition to this, if you have a great loot card worth saving, you can use this card to protect it from the death penalty. If you get hit with damage that would kill you, Fanny Pack gives you a loot card, which you can then sacrifice to the death penalty. There are better ways to get loot, but any method of getting loot is usually a good one. B tier. Finger isn't a super powerful item unless you have a decent amount of items on hand. When another player rolls a 2, you can swap any of your non-eternal items for one of theirs. If you can grab a sweet item from them in exchange for something lesser, like a sack of pennies, that's great. But usually what I see happen is the fun for the whole family game of Pass the Finger, which just results in item stealing chaos that is honestly pretty funny to watch. Fun fact, you can use this item to throw away your haunt items and give them to other players. Pro tip. B tier. Goathead is a superb item that specializes in making sure your hand is as optimized and powerful as possible. With this item, you are allowed to discard as many cards from your hand as you want at the end of your turn, and then draw equal amounts of cards back. This basically allows you to trash useless loot cards for the chance of getting more favorable ones from the deck. Obviously, this is really strong, especially if you have a good amount of loot cards. There really isn't a downside to this item. This thing is just really powerful. Anyone who's had this card before undoubtedly knows that. S tier. Greed's Gullet is a situational item. When you die holding it, you'll gain 8 cents. This means you'll probably be able to buy an item when it's your turn again, but aside from the obvious applications, I find this to be a counterintuitive item. An item that rewards you for dying by giving you almost enough money to buy another item? Keep in mind, the death penalty is an item, a cent, and a loot card. To me, that does not sound quite worth it, even for 8 cents. Don't get me wrong, 8 cents is a big jump, and in theory, could help you win a Soul of Greed. But I can't help but think that an item that softens the death penalty pales in comparison to an item that might, I don't know, prevent you from dying in the first place, like Mr. Boom. This might be a little controversial, but this is going in C tier. Guppy's Collar is just a working version of the Ankh. If you die, you roll, and if you hit a 1 through 3, your turn ends and you live. Otherwise, death proceeds as normal. A 50% chance to not pay the death penalty is nothing to scoff at, as the more you die, the more advantages you lose. In addition to this item counts towards getting the Soul of Guppy, which may or may not be in your game. Even if it isn't, this item still gets A tier. The 50% chance is massive, especially if you have a dice modifier of any kind. Keeping your stuff on death is a super underrated ability to have in 4 Souls. A tier. Ipecac is a mix of a damage up, which we've already talked about, and an aggressive item. If you roll a 6 on an attack, you deal 1 damage to all other players. If you manage to roll 2 6s on the same turn, that means you'll kill every other player in most situations. Even if it doesn't, you can force players to respond to the off-turn damage with soul hearts, draining them of resources to use in the future. Most people just use Ipecac as a damage up, but if you feel particularly nasty, remember, you can always re-roll that 5. Maybe you'll get a 6. S tier. Meat simply gives you +1 to attack rolls. Greater attack rolls is probably the greatest stat up of the 3 you can get. This is because 4 Souls is a very chance-based game. In chance-based games, the most consistent path to winning is lessening the effect chance has on the game, i.e. improving the likelihood you will hit something. Widening the window of opportunity is almost always better than throwing a bigger rock through it, although throwing a bigger rock can help sometimes. Basically, a 4+ roll monster is a lot easier than a 5+ roll monster most of the time. Meat gets an S tier. Mom's Box is an item that allows you to cycle your hand every so often. When a 4 is rolled, you are allowed to loot 1, then discard a loot card. This allows you the chance of a good loot card at the cost of one of your existing loot cards. Something to note, this card is risk-free due to the fact that you loot 1 before you discard, so if you don't like the card that you drew, you may just throw that same card away with no issues. I know I've put a lot of cards in B tier, but for some reason these early cards are oddly really balanced. So B tier. We'll get to the crazy cards soon enough, I swear. Mom's Coin Purse allows you to loot 1 more card than normal at the start of your turn. This means Mom's Coin Purse is in A tier. Looting 2 instead of 1 with Mom's Coin Purse at the start of your turn is very powerful, as it gives you double the chances of getting a good loot card. 99% of the time, the more loot cards are in your hand, the better you'll be doing. Always go for Mom's Coin Purse if you see it. It'll help you so much. A tier. Mom's Purse allows you to loot 1 more card than normal at the start of your turn. This means Mom's Purse is in A tier. Looting 2 instead of 1 with Mom's Purse at the start of your turn is very powerful, as it gives you double the chances of getting a good loot card. 99% of the time, the more loot cards are in your hand, the better you'll be doing. Always go for Mom's Purse if you see it. It'll help you so much. A tier. Mom's Razor allows you to deal 1 damage to a player if they roll a 6. This can allow you to play aggressively in the late game, but this sees little use in the early game. You know what? I'm just going to explain the stages of the game real quick, just because I can. Early game is around the first few rotations. Alliances are formed easily here, and most people are focused on getting good loot, good treasures, and things to help them gain souls. Some players may gain a soul, but most of the time people are more focused on saving cash for treasures. Most people are nice to each other because nobody has any reason to hate one another yet. The most useful items at this point in the game are resource gaining items, like these. The middle game takes up most of the game. People have a few souls at this point, maybe a bonus soul or 2. People have items and people are doing well. At this point, some rivalries have probably taken form. Maybe someone had to choose to kill someone, or there was a little betrayal down the line, you know. People might be a little less friendly towards one another and a little more neutral. Items that help with attacking are useful here, but to be fair, they're kind of useful at any point in the game. Late game begins basically as soon as someone is 1 soul away from winning. At this point, if you aren't on top, you are trying to drag people down. Some items, like Curse of the Tower, help you stay on top, while others, Mom's Razor, help you drag people down. Most, if not all, alliances have fallen at this point. Most people have no problem killing one another, or generally just being much more aggressive. What the fuck was I talking about? Oh, yeah. Mom's Razor. It's good, B tier. Most of the game, it's just okay, but late game, it blossoms into an okay item. The issue is it relies on a single dice roll to be effective, and obviously that's not something that's guaranteed to happen. Well, here's my first big mistake. In my original video, I assumed this item did not include the player who controlled it. Wrong. This item can, and very well might, destroy one of your items, which isn't something you want. At the start of your turn, a player is chosen randomly. That player must then destroy an item they control. Keeping in mind this can destroy items you control, and makes you a target while you hold it, I have lowered this item into B tier. It can be an effective form of player pressure, but the risk to yourself should be noted. Polydactyl allows you to gain a damage up for your first attack roll each turn, and allows you to play an additional loot card on your turn. The additional loot play is helpful, as it allows you to play 2 loot cards on your turn while still maintaining the ability to play a loot card in the off turn. The extra damage on your first roll can give you a great head start if you manage to hit it, that is. We've covered most of these stats before, so they roll into just a B tier item. Again, I'm sorry about all these B tiers, man. So balanced, that's so weird, isn't it? Restart is an item that more speeds up the game than directly benefits you. It allows the user to put any amount of shop items into discard at the start of your turn. You can use this to dump valuable items you don't want other players getting, or items you just rather not see. Overall, I really don't think this item is that useful. I've never seen this in a shop slot and think, damn, I need to allocate my resources and grab that for myself. I've never thought this. This earns it our first D tier. Sorry, Restock fans. Well, this card is great. Not much to say here. All this card does is give you the opportunity to change every epic fail roll into a guaranteed hit in terms of attacking. Sacred Heart has other uses, like being used in effect rolls, but really that's besides the point. S tier, not much to say here. Shadow is an incredibly good item to have if someone else has a really good item. When someone dies while you hold this, you not only gain the sense and loot they would toss, you also get to choose what item they discard. This gives you a huge amount of control on how the game flows. Being able to force players to discard their strongest treasure is very powerful, not to mention the free loot and sense you get. To be fair, the loot is usually not going to be the greatest, given that it will almost always be the worst loot card in their hand that you get. But still, this card is very well deserving of A tier for how well it can control the game. Shiny Rock is only good if you have a decent amount of active items, say 3. Gaining a cent every time you activate one of these items makes it a somewhat viable form of long-term resource gain. But I would be lying if I didn't think this item would work way better as a trinket. I mean, would you pay 10 cents for this? Like maybe if I had 4 active items, which, let's be honest, I probably don't have. It can be handy in the specific situation that it adheres to, but otherwise this item has too specific a use case to be all that helpful. C tier. Spider Mod. This item states that anytime a 5 is rolled, you may put a monster not being attacked into discard and replace it with the top card of the monster deck. This allows you to get rid of cursed monsters or monsters with effects that bog down the game even when it isn't being attacked, or monsters you're just tired of looking at. Now, is it just me, or should this item have a cooler effect? I feel like Spider Mod is a fan favorite in the video game, but why is it so boring here? I mean, I don't know. I just feel like this card isn't all that useful or that impactful to me. I'm sorry. C tier. Oh boy, rant time. I do not think I have ever seen anyone take advantage of starter deck, not once. You loot 2 if you have 8 cards in your hand at the end of your turn. This is just not something that happens in a normal game. What really hammers this thing into the D tier is that end of turn thing. Not only do I need 8 loot cards, but I need them at the end of my turn. The turn where I have probably already played at least 1 loot card, so I need to start with like maybe 8 or 9. This item is so specific and so useless that I am so boggled, blastered that the cheese grater is known as the memey horrible bad item card, and not this piece of nonsense. Not only does this come into play almost never, but unless the Soul of Gluttony is in play, why do you need 2 more loot cards? You have 8 already. I usually don't say this. You know, more loot cards is great. But this thing is stupid! I usually don't say this. I mean, more loot cards is better, but like, I mean, I guess you could get something better than what you have. It's, you know, it's always good to have more loot cards, but it's not like you're desperately in need of loot cards when you have it 8 of them at the end of your turn! Don't fucking buy this. You don't need it. You really don't. You're not gonna pull Lost Soul with this. Don't. Fuck it. D tier. Steamy Sale is S tier. I mean, look at it. Shop items for half price. The only downside to this, if you can even call it that, is that you can't take advantage of this with buying from the top, as sometimes the items in the shop are just not good. Items being half off means you can spend less time collecting synths and more time playing other loot cards or going for other things. Steamy Sale isn't just a discount. It allows you to spend more loot plays using bombs or soul hearts instead of gaining synths. Now it's even better than you thought it was. You're welcome. Suicide King is a very situational card. Unless you're playing as it allows you to loot 3 before you pay penalties for dying, which basically allows you to prevent any of the loot you had before death from being lost. The problem with this card, of course, is that dying is bad, and you typically won't be able to take advantage of this card more than once. When you die, you'll likely want to hold on to treasures that outright prevent you from dying, rather than making it more palatable. This item gets a C tier. It doesn't give enough to really be worth keeping around, and unless you have a shittier item, you probably won't hold on to this item when you die. We've already talked about, Synthanol. S tier. Terracloth is a card we've basically already covered. It's Dead Bird, but worse. Instead of looking at a player's hand to steal a card, this item forces the player in question to give you a loot card of their choice. Not only do you not get to see that player's hand, but you can't choose what loot you get, not even randomly. It's just kinda sad. B tier. The blue map allows you to look at and rearrange the top 4 cards in the treasure deck at the end of your turn. This can give you intel on what cards are up next and can allow you to control what the next item a player gets. The only issue is that you'll likely have to wait a rotation for you to take advantage of however you arrange the cards, which is a problem all the map items share. This item would be a lot better if you use it at the start of your turn. C tier. Okay, nobody talks about this, but the chest is just a free soul waiting to happen. For the low price of suicide, or specific interactions, you get a free soul. Be careful while this is still an item. Other players might try to steal it with items like Contract from Below. Still, this thing is basically a lost soul but for the treasure tech. SS tier. The compass will almost never affect you while you hold it. Being able to rearrange cards in a deck at the end of your turn nets you some control, maybe allowing you to make a deal with someone to get them a good card. The fact that it only goes 4 cards deep means that unless nobody got any loot aside from their loot step, you won't be able to get any of the loot you rearrange without help from an item. This thing is just not good. D tier. The D10 is kind of the unsaid nothing item, like cheese grater. Like nobody says it, but we're all thinking it, right? Like, wow, what useful strategies this opens up. So glad I managed to find this card. It allows you to place the top card of a monster deck in a slot not being attacked when a 3 is rolled. You can use it to see what cards might be hiding in the top deck, and to cover annoying cursed monsters you don't want to fight, but other than that, this doesn't really have too many applications. C tier. The Dead Cat is one of the best defensive items in the game, until it stops working. Gaining this item basically gets you a temporary +9 health, which basically guarantees you at least 1 free monster kill. Not to mention this is a Guppy item, which allows it to be chosen as part of Devil Deal and counts towards Soul of Guppy. The only problem with this item is that once it runs out of counters, it's useless unless you have a particular item that might be able to replenish them somehow. This item gets an S anyway, because I mean +9 health. Even if it's temporary, it's crazy. The Habit allows you to recharge an item the first time you take damage each turn. This can be useful both on and off turn, as it allows you to use an item you might have already used another time if you get hit, or when something does damage to you in the off turn, and trust me, a lot of things can do damage to you in the off turn, you can use it in response. The only issue with this item, other than that some players might be able to read and may avoid making you take a useless 1 damage, is that you may not always have an item worth recharging. Because of that inconsistency, this gets a B tier. This item is just blue map for the monster deck. You can use it to put monsters in an order that might benefit or be a detriment to other players, search for events and curses and warn others, or keep a nasty card out of play. It's probably the best of the search for at the end of turn cards, but not by a particularly wide margin. It suffers from the same downfalls as most of the others, and is just in all a little bit of an under the radar type of card. C tier. The Midas Touch is actually really good. Gaining 3 cents for every monster that dies is no little number. On a typical turn, most players will try to attack a monster. If they manage to kill it, you gain 3 cents. If they fail, barring any escape type cards, they die and lose resources. This is a win-win for you and leads to you gaining a pretty consistent chunk of change. Don't sleep on this card. A tier. The Polaroid sucks. This is another card I'm sure we all look at and think, well, what the fuck am I going to do with this? It allows you to draw 2 loot cards at the end of your turn if you have none. This only benefits players who are the lowest of the low, and not by choice. Unlike with Sense, you can't easily make yourself have 0 loot cards. You have to play all of them or die a whole lot, and a card that benefits that is not a card I encourage you to get. D tier. The Relic is just great, not much to say. Gaining a loot card anytime someone rolls 1 is just good. You'd better hang on to this in the early game. Holding this will net you a free loot pretty consistently, especially if players have some roll for X type items. A tier. There's Options is just an okay item. It gives its controller knowledge of what's on top of the treasure deck and the ability to buy a second shop item on their turn, which, to be honest, does not come up too often, but it's a nice surprise to be sure when it does. This item is kind of not great if you don't have the money to do anything, and it does not directly benefit you if you don't have any way to get a decent amount of sense. It has its moments, but it's just too situational to be above C tier. Trinity Shield! A lot of people really do not like this item. And I can see why. It makes other players unable to interfere with you on your turn. No loot cards or active item uses. However, I do have to point out this item is almost exclusively for the late game. Not being able to ask for help from other players can be a massive hindrance. So if you buy this, you should make absolutely sure you do not need to ask for help until this item is destroyed. Do not get this item if you aren't in the lead or about to be in the lead. A tier. Blank card is, simply put, very powerful. It allows you to, when tapped, play a copy of the last loot card you played. The reason this is so powerful is because a great deal of loot cards in Four Souls have no copies. You won't find a copy of cards like Stars or Death. Using this allows you to gain twice the benefits from any loot you play, definitely deserving of S tier. Book of Sin is a weird mix between a combat support card and a resource gain card. When tapped, you roll for an effect. Rolling 1 or 2 gets you a penny, which sucks. 3-4 gets loot, which is okay. And a 5 or 6 gets you an extra health for the current turn, which is pretty good. Other than the rare chance this card has to be used to block damage in the off turn, it isn't too noteworthy. You'll usually use it at the start of each turn, hoping to get that health up, and benefiting even if you don't. B tier. Boomerang allows you to choose a player and steal a random loot card from their hand. Being random, this card is as effective as you think it is, randomly. You might steal yourself a great card, or you might take a dud off your opponent's hand. Despite the randomness, gaining a loot card every time you use this and depriving someone else of a loot card as well is pretty good. When your resources go up and other players go down, you are putting greater distance between you and that player in terms of options than just gaining 1 loot from this loot deck. This gets an A tier. Box is a card useful only in extremely specific power plays in the late game. Using it will destroy it and allow you to play as many loot cards as you want this turn. This can be used to cash in on all your sent loot cards, rack up some crazy interaction combo that somehow results in you going from no souls to 5, but the one thing it cannot be used for is anything if you do not have a large amount of loot cards. If you're desperate, you can use this to gain an off-turn loot play, but aside from that, this card isn't the best. When it gets its time to shine, it can really shine, but its use case is so specific you just may not see it during your game. C tier. Bum Friend allows you to loot 1 when used, and after that, you place 1 loot card from your hand on top of the deck. This kind of allows you to cycle your hand, but not very effectively, as putting the card from your hand on top of the deck means if you use Bum Friend again, you'll just get the card you threw away. It's helpful that you draw the loot before discarding the loot from your hand, though. It means if you draw a dud, you can just put it right back. This card is alright, but the inability to use it more often just kind of knocks it down a peg. C tier. There are 2 types of people who use Chaos. People who use it to constantly shake up the game, using it whenever possible, and people who bought it from the shop while staring down the player with an 8-card hand to their right. Most will fall into the latter, but it's fun to see someone just be goofy with it. It may surprise you to hear, but having indirect control over who owns what hand is pretty goddamn powerful, and swapping hands to look for valuable cards is a great strategy. This gets an A tier. Well, we all know where this is going. Most of the time, Chaos card is used to instantly kill a boss or mega boss for that free soul or souls. The second most popular use for it is to destroy a soul, usually that of a winning player. But as for killing players or destroying items, I have almost never seen it happen. It's certainly always good to have that option. Being able to instantly kill something, someone, destroying item, or set a player back a soul is just plain fantastic. Always go for this card if you see it. If not for you, so that your friends can't use it against you. SS tier. Compost is a card that requires a little thoughts and a little planning to use effectively, i.e. looking at the top card of the discard to see if you want it. In all seriousness though, the real use of this card is to be able to rescue cards you've already played. Say you're attacking a monster with loot and its rewards. You deal 1 damage and finish it off with a bomb to stay safe. You can then use Compost to get that bomb back. It's a specific use, but one that can really come in handy on occasion. A tier. Crystal Ball basically allows you the 1 in 6 chance of looting 3 when this is used. If you have any form of dice manipulation, this can be a good item to have. Being able to choose the dice roll it activates causes a little inconsistency at times, but being able to choose what roll to aim for is certainly not a downside. The issue is, if you can't hit that 1 in 6 number, this item is useless. I've had games where I've gotten 6 loot in a turn with this, and one where I missed every single roll. That's just how it happens. A good 4 Souls item is both powerful and consistent. The issue with this item, it is just not consistent at all. C tier. Decoy is an item that when used, swaps with another non-eternal item another player controls. This isn't always the most strategic item to use, but I wouldn't call it bad. It's likely this item will just cause a board-wide game of steal the good item before whoever's holding it eventually dies and sacrifices it. Stealing an item is good, but giving whoever you stole it from the resources to steal it right back does not make a great item. C tier. Diplopia can either be a massive help or completely useless, depending on what cards are in play. It allows you to copy the effects of a passive item until the end of turn. There are lots of great passive items like damage ups and health ups, but these cards aren't guaranteed to be in your game. You could very well not have a useful passive to copy or any passive to copy at all. This possibility drags the card down slightly. But here's something to think about. When you hold this card, it will always have the best effect of every passive item on the table, since you can change it to fit your situation whenever you want. Or when you have a charge for it, that is. A tier. Flush allows you to banish every card in either the monster slots or shop slots to the bottom of their respective decks when used. You can use this to make the game flow smoother by tossing annoying monsters or bad treasures, or keep other players from attacking monsters you'd rather them not. This is another card that doesn't so much benefit you as it benefits the whole table most of the time, so it's really nothing special. C tier. Glass Cannon, what a power play. This card destroys another item in play when used. Then you roll. Upon rolling a 1 through 5, this is destroyed and you loot 2. This is already a great card. Destroying someone else's item and looting 2 is nothing to shake off. But if you roll a 6, this card is recharged, ready to use a second time. If you have some form of dice manipulation, this card becomes much better. The more you can use this, the more valuable treasures you can rip from your opponents. Since it's a single use, most of the time, it's going in A tier, but I'll be damned if I don't go for this thing when I see it. Unlike in the video game, Godhead actually is better than Sacred Heart and 4 Souls. Using it allows you to change any dice roll into a 1 or a 6. This removes all chance from an attack roll in comparison to re-rolling it, no matter what you're going for. Want the attacker to die? Change it to a 1. Want him to get a free hit? Change it to a 6. Godhead is a fantastic item because using it is not luck-based. It is certain that it will be as effective as possible every time, unless it gets butterbeat. S tier. Guppy's Head allows you to choose a player and they must give you 1 of their loot cards. This honestly makes it kind of a worse Boomerang. While Boomerang allows you to take a random card from a player of choice, Guppy's Head allows the player the option of what loot card to fork over, i.e. their worst one. This doesn't mean Guppy's Head is a bad item, however. It's still half of a soul of Guppy if it is in play, and again, gaining loot cards of any kind is always helpful. B tier. Guppy's Paw is encouraged to be used to defend other players. This item costs you 1 health to use when tapped, and prevents the next instance of up to 2 damage to a player. While you can use this to basically turn a 2 damage hit into a 1 damage hit, you can also use this to barter with other players, who will use its benefit much better than you ever will. Overall, an average item. B tier. Host Hat isn't bad, but people usually see it as a bit of a weird item. When used, you block 1 damage to you, and if you block that damage, you deal 1 damage to a player. Dealing 1 damage to a player is alright, and lends itself to the late game decently, but due to the fact that you can only use it on yourself, there isn't much left to talk about here. Maybe you could use it to deal damage to a player after blocking a hit, and then finish them off with a bomb. B tier, I guess. Jawbone. Some people really hate this card, apparently. I do have to admit, it is quite a powerful item. I've said this already, but gaining 3 cents is not what makes this a good card. It's the fact that it also takes 3 cents from a player. Being able to use this every rotation on any player you like means if you want to, you can consistently drain resources from a single player and leave them penniless. A tier. People might target you if you have this though. It is kind of a dickish item. Lucky Foot will allow you to add up to 2 to any non-attack roll when tapped. This gives it more of a supportive role, excelling in being used for roll for effect items, pills, or event cards. Lucky Foot isn't used super often, but when you do encounter a situation to use it, it's a really nice change of pace. Since it's another item that largely benefits from having items or cards that synergize with it, it gets B tier. Mini Mush is almost exclusively used aggressively. Sure, you could use it to alter non-attack rolls, but you know what's more consistent than waiting for an opportunity to lower a non-attack roll? Lowering someone else's attack roll and getting them killed. This is another solid late game card that can really ruin a leading player's role. A tier. Modeling Clay has the potential to be a fantastic item if it has a good item to copy. This item is weird to rank as it's totally dependent on the situation it's in to be useful. Maybe you'll copy a friend's godhead, maybe someone's birthright, or maybe you'll be forced to settle with copying someone's placebo or something. Keep in mind you can use it to copy one of your items, getting 2 of a single powerful item. A tier. Mom's Bra is really not the best. When used, it will reduce the next instance of damage a player takes this turn to 1. This means that it is only useful when fighting high damage monsters. Most monsters tend to have 1 damage, which makes this not of use in many situations. When it is up against a monster with higher than 1 damage, it's still a worse version of Dry Baby. The big issue with this item is the lack of an effect on 1 damage monsters. It can make you tankier against high damage monsters, maybe allowing you to tank an extra hit, but beyond that, this is really not that great. C tier. Mom's Shovel is an evil little item. It starts uncharged, but once you can use it, it allows you to steal a soul from another player. This is obviously very powerful. Not only does it put you up a soul, it puts someone else down a soul. Again, furthering the distance between you two. In addition to this, you can use this to steal a Mega Boss's souls, gaining 2, since technically Mega Boss souls count as 1 soul, it just has a value of 2. With this considered, Mom's Shovel just gets an SS tier without breaking a sweat. Too easy. Monster Manual is great for stopping other players from attacking a monster you don't want them attacking. When used, you can force a player to attack a specific monster on their turn, if able. This is useful for so many reasons, from making sure players avoid getting souls to putting players in unwinnable fights. This card is a fantastic one to have on hand, A tier. Mr. Boom is a fantastic, reusable bomb that affects monsters. What else could you ask for? You could ask for the ability to deal damage to players, I guess, but that doesn't change the fact that this item allows you to get a head start on your attacks or finish off risky ones. Easy S tier. Mystery Sack is alright. When you roll, you gain either a loot, 4 cents, or nothing, all with equal chances of happening. This item is alright, but the resource gain isn't crazy, and it has that chance to fail. It's nice to have on hand, but honestly, in terms of resource gain items, it's just kind of mediocre. B tier.
No!
Allows you to counter other active and paid items, which can be very useful, but it suffers from the fact it can't do anything about loot cards. This thing is basically a reusable butterbean for active items, but if there aren't any good active items to cancel the effect of, this becomes less desirable. I will say, this item, like all defensive items, can be pretty powerful in the late game. Stopping other people from using powerful items is nothing to brush off, and for that, I'll give this A tier. Pandora's Box is a single-use item that will either reward you greatly or not really. It has a lot of effects, but the 2 you need to pay attention to are killing a monster and gaining a soul. These are by far the most powerful effects, and you should most definitely go for them. A free soul is a free soul, and a dead monster with a soul is a free soul. As for the other effects, bad, okay. A tier. Placebo has the potential to be a great item if there are other good active items in play. Being able to copy any tap you want is pretty powerful depending on the items available. Every good item in play technically benefits you as you hold this, which makes this pretty strong. If you think about it, this tap will always have the ability of whatever the best item for the situation is at the table. That's a pretty tough upside to ignore. A tier. Potato Peeler sucks. I guess if you have a way to look into decks, it's alright, but if you aren't playing Eve or don't have that, this item is just almost nearly useless. It can be used in tandem with deck searching items to throw away undesirable events and treasures, but come on, who are we kidding? This thing is just almost never useful. D tier. Razor Blade is a top tier late game item. During the early game, it won't usually see much use unless someone wants to be super aggressive super early. But as the game heats up, as things get more aggressive, using this thing to finish off wounded players becomes a very viable strategy. You can hold people for ransom with it too, demanding to be paid in exchange for not using it to kill someone. All around, this item can just be the king of player control sometimes. A tier. Remote Detonator is only useful if the board is united to destroy one specific problem item. The reason this is because the effect does nothing if the vote ties. Something you'll see if use of this item isn't warranted is players voting to destroy the items of whoever used it, ironically often the Remote Detonator itself, which is pretty funny. Overall, this item won't see much use past early to mid-game, as players tend to break the unity needed to make this item work pretty early on. C tier. Sack Hit is a simple but effective deck search item. It allows you to look at the top card of a deck, and if you want to, put that card on the bottom. This is good for any time you might want to be able to interact with the top card of any deck, as you can see would you rather do whatever with it or a random. All around, just good to have. B tier. Alright, don't quote me on this, but I once heard from a Four Souls developer that Sack of Pennies should have been a trinket, and honestly, I have to agree. Like, let's think about this. Imagine paying 10 cents for an item that can be used to gain 1 cent and occasionally recharges when someone rolls a 1. Look, I love resource gain items as much as the next guy, but this is by far the worst one of them. This is usually going to be an item you discard at the end of your turn. It's just, oh my god. This is just so bad. 1 penny per tap. Yeah, if you have like counterfeit penny or something, yeah, it's better, but every cent gain item is better when you have counterfeit penny. This is just so bad. It's D tier. It's horrible. Really? Not too much to say about Spoonbender. It adds 1 to a roll, and that tends to be pretty effective, pretty useful. You can use it to hit an attack you would have missed, hit an outcome on a pill you wanted, increase the number of a dice you just rolled, raise the amount of dots on a face of a 6-sided random number generating instrument, open the opportunity of rolling a number less than what you wanted as if you use the A tier. Everyone kinda knows Tech X is an ungodly amount of good. It basically acts as a reusable chaos card in a way, allowing you to kill a monster after gaining 3 counters. To gain counters, you simply need to tap this card. That means if you have spare batteries on hand, you can rush the process to kill a monster or player early. If there's nothing to remove or disable this item, the game this item is in is basically put on a timer, each use of this item causing the user to inch closer and closer to victory. Easy SS tier, almost no questions asked. The battery allows you to recharge another item when used. I've talked about this before with the little battery loot card in a previous video, in that this item can be amazing or useless. It all depends on what items you have to combo with this. It relies on other items you control to be effective, so I am just going to have to rank it as completely average. When its usefulness varies so wildly, that's all I can really do. This item can be super useful if you have an active starting item, by the way. Nothing wrong with some more uses, but still, this thing just gets B tier. I don't think I've heard anybody talk about the D100, which is kind of surprising. This may be one of the best resource gain items out there, if not the best. Not a single one of these outcomes are All of these are surprisingly useful, but the best obviously being the temporary stat ups upon rolling a 5 or 6. If you see this thing in the early game, go for it. I guarantee it'll help you out a ton. A tier. The D20 is an absolute classic. Just like in the video game, re-rolling is a fantastic mechanic. But unlike in the game, you have the opportunity to use re-rolling aggressively. Using this item to change a really good item an other player might have is a great idea, especially if you have knowledge of what's on top of the treasure deck. Due to the fact re-rolling is largely still chance-based, this gets a solid A tier. This is great to have. Something to keep in mind, you can re-roll your trinkets into treasures with this, as trinkets count as items. The D4 is the item the Lost used to start with in the video game. I always wondered why you used to start with that, just so weird. What's the synergy? What's the situation? Anyway, in Four Souls, it does exactly what it did in The Binding of Isaac. Rerolls all items a player holds after destroying itself. It didn't do that last bit in the video game, but this is a little thing called balancing that this card game employs. Not very well, but it tries. Obviously, there's the benefit of rerolling another player's entire item set, potentially screwing up whatever plan they've got going. But maybe consider the possibility, think about this, of using it on yourself. If you've got a set of items or trinkets just taking up space, waiting to be sacrificed, maybe this little mass reroll will change your luck. I know it changed mine on occasion. I'm putting this in A tier, even if it is a more extreme version of its predecessor. The shovel. Now this one, a close friend actually convinced me to rank up. The shovel is able to sift through the monster discard to bring any discarded non-event monster back and set it on top of the monster deck. I originally sat this card in D tier, citing that rarely this is used to bring back anything useful, but I neglected to think about the fact that not all monsters in discard got there by being killed. There are a lot of events, items, and loot cards that discard monsters to function, and I realize that now. With this in mind, it is possible that this item could see more strategic late-game use, since you can dig through every single monster that has been discarded to find something easy to kill, or quite possibly a monster with a soul that has been discarded. It's just enough to move it into C tier, but no higher. Now, 2 of clubs is fantastic. Use this at the start of your turn, and for the rest of your turn, you get double the loot for every instance, including the start of the turn loot step. What else is there to say? You could use this to barter with other players too, like, hey, I'll give you double loot cards this turn, but why would you give them that amazing advantage? It's really best to keep this one all to yourself. Definite S tier. Battery Bum, an item that allows you to pay 4 cents to recharge an item. This kind of acts as a weaker version of the battery. The same use case for it applies here, but here you have the potential to use it more the more cash you are willing to spend. While the battery is consistently available, this item can be stronger if you have the cash to back it up. Sometimes you just don't have any money and can't use this. In my honest opinion, I think usually the battery is just better than this. Battery Bum gets a C tier. 4 cents is just a lot, man. Contract from Below is usually more dangerous to you than others. Using it allows you to steal another player's item at the cost of destroying 2 of your items, one of which is almost always the contract itself. This item can be quite useful in very niche situations, but in most cases it ends up being a little too costly. Destroying 2 of your items means whatever you're stealing had better be worth it, and even if it is, you are definitely left vulnerable. The less treasures you have, the less bad treasures you have to pay out the death penalty. The problems this item has adds it up to make it a C tier. Again, you can make power plays with this. If someone has a really good card over there, you can sacrifice it all to take it. But that situation just doesn't come up often enough. Donation Machine. This item is mostly just not worth it, unless you have a haunt item or something undesirable. Donation Machine allows you to give away one of your items in return for 8 cents, and honestly, cents are just not worth it in return for items you could have sacrificed for the death penalty. We could sit here and ponder situations in which this would be useful, and you can maybe rush the Soul of Greed with this or something, but let's be real, this item is no good, and nobody has even looked at it sitting in the shop and said to themselves, I should spend 10 cents on that! D tier. Golden Razor Blade is another item that depends on how much cash you have on hand to be effective. Being able to spend 5 cents to use a bomb is nothing to scoff at, but being able to use this multiple times in one turn is a little rare. Obviously, this item lends itself to the late game, when you might have enough items to forego buying more in favor of killing people, but usually people won't go for this. I won't overlook its late game uses, however. With an ample wallet, this item can demolish the opposition. B tier. Pay to play is just straight up a better version of Contract from Below. Like, why destroy 2 of your items when controlling this basically makes all other players' inventories shop slots? Honestly, the more I look at this thing, the better it gets. Maybe that guy in my comment section was onto something. Being able to steal an item for the same cost as buying one is super useful, as when you steal, not only do you get an item, whoever had the item does not have it anymore, which is useful if you don't want them to win. B tier. Portable Slot Machine isn't really that good. It's just a 3-cent paid version of Mystery Sack, and the resource gain isn't really good enough to justify excessively gambling over this. To be fair, luck is a fickle beast. Maybe there's some yahoo out there who uses this every game to get Soul of Greed and Gluttony. Not me though, I do not like this thing. C tier. Smelter is pretty useful. It allows you to turn loot cards into money, which gives you something to do with all those lesser cent cards. You don't even have to tap this, just boil up those loot cards and profits! Just remember, without bad loot cards in your hand, someone who might steal from you only has good ones to choose from. And when you die, you'll be forced to part with a valuable tool for success instead of that butt penny you nixed a turn ago. Best to only use this when you need the money right now. A tier. Unlike the video game, the poop is actually not half bad an item here. Getting hit while holding this gives it a counter, and you can use these counters to prevent 1 damage each. Basically, this becomes a soul heart generator if you hold onto this for a long while. Even when I say it out loud, I start to think this item is like, wow, that's actually pretty nice. If you see this, try and hold on to it for a while. It may be much more useful than it looks. A tier. Baby Haunt sucks, and you'll always groan when it appears. It states that monsters have +1 dice roll whenever its controller's turn, making everything worse. There's no upside to this, I think you know this, but it's basically a curse found in the treasure deck. However, unlike curses, this counts as an item, meaning you can use it in destroy an item prompts, or can even re-roll it. It won't be destroyed by the death penalty though. If you die holding a haunt item, you give it to another player, allowing you to choose who to curse with misfortune upon your demise. F tier. Daddy Haunt amplifies any damage you would take by 1. This usually results in you dying in 1 hit on your turn while you control this. Same tips apply to Baby Haunt, just not fun, this item sucks, F tier, it's over. 9 volt allows you to recharge up to 2 items you control at the end of your turn. Like I've discussed with previous recharge-based items, you need to have good items to recharge for this item to be effective. Being able to use 2 items in the off turn you already used during your turn can be quite the advantage, but you may not always have 2 items to recharge, like I said. It's a powerful effect, but proves less than useful if you don't have any items to recharge. B tier. Guppy's Tail is a worse version of Mom's Purse. It allows you to loot 1 at the start of your turn, at the cost of having to discard 1 at the end of your turn. The highlight of this item used to be that it was a Guppy item, but now that the Soul of Guppy is no longer a guarantee, this item may not be as useful. Being able to loot 1 at the start of your turn is nice, but if you don't have a useless loot card to discard at the end of your turn, you might end up discarding things you really don't want to discard. B tier. Infamy simply allows you to take no damage on an attack roll of 1. Despite being kind of a worse version of Dad's Lost Coin, this item rises above all other prevent damage on a roll items due to the fact that a 1 is in 98.4% of cases a miss. Other take no damage on X items are likely to be less and less useful the higher the number is, but statistically speaking, Infamy is almost always great to have. S tier, easy. Mom's Knife is definitely one of the better damage up items. Upon rolling a 6 on a combat roll, you deal 1 damage to all other monsters, which if you can do multiple times, can allow you to kill some extra monsters in addition to the one you're attacking. Like all basic damage up items, this gets an S tier. More options is just a better version of options. Being able to look 2 cards deep in the treasure deck at the start of your turn is just nice. The additional purchase is also kind of helpful, but I just have a hard time ranking this a whole tier higher than options. I've already explained the options in the first video, so C tier it goes. Placenta is a fantastic item. Getting a health up and negating combat damage on a roll of 4 is pretty sweet. Even if preventing damage on a roll of 4 isn't the best number to prevent damage for, it's still quite a nice bonus when paired with a health up. Like most stat ups, this gets an S tier. Skeleton Key is completely insane, and in the late game can be a decisive game winner. To be completely fair, you might need some other items to pull some crazy plays, but you don't need to use Skeleton Key as this Doomslayer Destroyer enabler. Skeleton Key can be used to take down weak monsters without wasting attacks. The reason this card is so good is the game itself is balanced around taking a finite amount of attacks, and removing that finite limit has some game-breaking potential. Having access to basically infinite attacks gives you so much freedom on your turn. This card gets an S tier for sure. Soy Milk is just not worth it. Upping dice rolls by 1 on your turn is not worth dealing 1 damage to all monsters upon dealing damage. There are niche situations where this works well, like if there's a low health, high roll monster on the board and a high health, low dice roll monster on the board, you can attack for the possibility of killing the first mentioned monster. I know that's a lot to process, but I'll just say it, stuff like this just happens very rarely. Unless you have an item that negates this item's downsides, this is just not worth it, almost ever. D tier. The missing page is kind of like an aggressive version of Dad's Lost Coin, re-rolling 5s instead of 1s. Forcing a player to reroll a 5, a very good roll, can be very dangerous for them, as it will most likely roll lower than a 5. You won't often use the missing page on yourself, but like I said, it's a pretty useful aggressive item to have. You might be surprised, but I'm going to rank this thing as B tier. It's very useful for the late game, but the fact of the matter is, this thing does not help you very much. It drags other players down. I wouldn't go for this in the early game, because making enemies in the early game is just not a great idea. Try to be nice. You'll get a lot farther being well-liked in the early game than you think you will, trust me. Crooked Penny is an item that might help you out and might not. When used, there's a 50-50 chance you'll either double a player's current sense or reduce it to 0. Obviously, if you have some form of dice manipulation, this item is incredibly useful. Crooked Penny can also be used on other players, hopefully to destroy their fortune instead of double it. Risking it for that crazy scent grab is a viable strategy, I won't lie, but be careful not to gamble too much or too hard. You'll pay big time if you lose. A tier. Fruitcake is weird. It has weird effects that don't really line up. A recharge effect that usually doesn't come into play because people won't pay attention to it, and is overall just really weird. When you use it, you roll. If you roll a 1, you loot 1, which is alright. If you roll a 2 or a 3, you gain 1 cent, which is kinda bad. And if you roll a 4, 5, or 6, you look at the top card of a deck, which is what you're probably gonna go for when you use this thing. In addition to this, each time a player rolls the same result twice in a row, this recharges, allowing you to use it a little more frequently. This item is a combination of a low-tier resource gain item and an informational item. It's just so weird, and I'd have to put it in C tier, I suppose. It's not awful, but the use cases for each thing you roll are all kinda really different, you know. It's not the worst item in the world, but come on, you can certainly do better. I can't believe it's not. The Butterbean is kind of just the Butterbean loot card, but an item. The only thing is, you can only really use this defensively because you have to use it on something that targets an item you control. Holding on to this is a nice deterrent for people trying to screw you over in the late game, which makes this pretty good. A tier. Lemon Mishap is a card that doesn't see a lot of use, which for what it seems to do is fair. When used, each time a player rolls an attack roll of 1 or 2, all monsters take 1 damage. This makes it slightly more likely that you'll kill a monster if you miss on a roll of 1 or 2, since you both take damage instead of just you. This item has more of a use than you might think. In addition to being able to sell its use to other players, this item can be especially useful when there's abundance of monster slots and a few 1 to 2 health monsters. The chance of killing a couple of these little monsters with this makes it certainly worth using during these situations. Too many people consider this item worthless. While personally I think it's niche, I do think it has its uses every so often. C tier. Library card can be tapped to play an additional loot card this turn. With how simple this card is, I doubt I need to go into any extensive details about how useful an additional off-turn response is. We all know it's great. Keep in mind, this card essentially grants you an extra opportunity to play a card. The usefulness of that play depends entirely upon the card being played. One final thing to note, this card is exceedingly useful for characters who cannot play loot cards in the off-turn, like Blind Johnny or Captain Viridian. Still, this thing gets A tier. A Ouija board allows you to search 4 cards deep in the monster deck, specifically for an event card. You then throw the cards you didn't pick away at the bottom of the deck. You don't have to reveal the event and activate it if the event sucks. You can just banish it to the bottom of the deck like the others if you choose to. The only issue with this card is it can end up throwing away monsters that might have been useful for you attack. Oh well, B tier. Plan C is a nefarious single-use late-game power play card. Say that 5 times fast. When used, it will kill a monster, and at the end of the turn, every player. You'll mostly see it used when the user has but a single soul left to grab, and its negative no longer matters. However, you can also use this item to rush a Soul of Wrath. If 2 players have already died and you are in a 4-player game, you can use this on your turn to kill everyone and a monster, possibly gaining not 1, but 2 souls. Very powerful stuff here, but remember, this card will kill you too. Still, SS tier. The Bible is a beacon of versatile utility, and every time I see it, I jump at the chance to claim it as my own. The Bible allows you to choose from 3 effects when used. First is to destroy a curse. Not only does this make you all but immune to curses, it also opens up barter potential, allowing cursed players to pay you to rid them of their curses. Secondly, and likely the effect you'll use the most, cancel your attack. This effect is invaluable, negating most, if not outright all risk from attacking monsters or players while you hold this. The ability to back out of a losing battle is something incredibly powerful in a game where death is so punishing. The third effect is not often used, but when it does, it likely wins games right then and right there. The ability to instantly kill 4 different mega bosses is absolutely nuts when it happens to come into play. Again, it usually won't, but when it does, you'll feel its power. It should shock nobody that this item is a guaranteed S tier. What a godly support item. The Butterbean is a meme item. It doesn't do anything. It gets F tier. I have nothing to say about it because it doesn't do anything. Some people will argue that it should be in D tier because it doesn't technically negatively affect you, but it does. Say you, buy a treasure off the top. You get this thing instead of something useful. You've just lost 10 cents for this useless thing. I'm putting it in F tier. It's bad. Dad's Key allows you to place the top card of a monster deck in a slot not being attacked for the cost of 1 loot card. This support card is alright. 1 loot can be a steep price to pay sometimes, but if you have some less than stellar cards in your hand, it can allow you to attack a new monster without risking the randomness of the top deck. That 1 loot cost brings it down a little though, B tier. Succubus can be an incredible defensive option for a player to have. Simply holding it means that as long as you have 3 cents, you can make not 1 but 2 responses on any turn. If you have this card, make sure to always have at least 3 cents on hand. The mere possibility of having a response will be enough to ward away most players. A tier. I feel like 1-Up would be a much better card if it was worded just a little differently. If you happen to die on your turn while holding this, the card is consumed, your death is prevented, and you heal to full HP. You may then attack an additional time this turn. The issue I have with this thing is that it only affects death on your turn, not anyone else's. Why is that? I don't know, Ed balance. The fact it does not protect you in the off turn really makes this less than what it could be. A C tier. Abaddon is a risky but powerful item. What other item gives you a flat 3 damage up? Of course, with this incredible upside, there's a price to pay. Whenever you take damage, you just die. Not great. No amount of health ups are going to help you on this one, but damage prevention is going to be your best buddy. Remember that low health characters like the Lost can use this item with no consequences. Makes you think. Despite its challenges, having a damage stat of 4 means you one-shot most monsters and bosses. Like I said, very risky, very rewarding. Due to the fact that player interference is a thing, i.e. some other player could just touch you or sneeze on you and you just die and lose stuff, this gets B tier. Cursed Eye is a bit like a lighter version of Abaddon, with a lighter good effect and a lighter bad effect, but honestly, the bad effect ends up being kinda useful more often than not. When you roll a 6 during combat while holding this, you add 3 damage to however much damage you would deal in that instance, which is great. Dealing a shitload of damage is just awesome, we just discussed that. However, when you roll a combat roll of 1, your turn ends and everything that has not been resolved gets cancelled. This sounds kinda bad, but if you plan your turn around this, it can end up saving you from death. Just try to get everything you want to do on your turn done before you attack. That way, it's possible you escape the attack instead of dying if you are less than successful. I'd give this item an A tier. It's risky, unreliable, but both its effects tend to be kinda handy. Daddy Longlegs is a card that's value is quite easy to see. Starting a turn with dealing damage to a player or monster is useful at any point in the game. You can use it to kill a monster with 1 health, lower the health of a monster you plan to attack, or put a player in an unsafe position. Daddy Longlegs is a fantastic card to have at any point in the game, and that grants this an S tier. Euthanasia, another item I screwed up the math on. Whenever you roll the same number twice in a row while attacking, this kills the monster you are attacking immediately. One thing you'll know about me is I suck with numbers, which is why I assumed that this item's effect had a 1 in 36th chance of it coming into play, which is incorrect. As a commenter put it, you're guaranteed to roll a number on your first attack roll. The second number must match the first to activate, and so on. With this dramatic increase in chances, I can confidently boost this up to A tier. As I put it originally, this item gets even better if you have some form of dice manipulation, so if this tool comes into your possession, be on the lookout for one. Game Breaking Bug is a fantastic, aggressive, and support item. While you hold this, you can reroll one of any player's items whenever they roll a 1, including yourself. This not only means you can reroll other players' more valuable items, but you can also reroll your own bad items. This item is generally useful at all points of the game, and I would go for it if I saw it. S tier. Guppy's Eye is a fantastic card for so many reasons. Buying this forces all other players to play with their loot cards revealed, making all players completely unable to hide anything from you. A good player will always be able to see exactly what everyone is playing while they hold this. This card is absolutely one of the best out there, and is hands down the best informational card in the game. No question about it. In addition to that, this card counts towards the Soul of Guppy, which, if it's in play, makes this even better than it already is. What a card. God damn. S tier for sure. Head of the Keeper is one of the best resource gain items in the game, but it comes with the risk of needing to attack to make use of it. It states that each time you deal damage, you gain a cent, and each time you kill a monster or player, you gain 2 cents. Let's say on average a monster has 3 health. If you deal 1 damage and manage to kill it, that means you'll gain 3 cents for each time you dealt damage, and an additional 2 cents for the kill, on top of whatever reward the monster already gave you. As long as you have monsters to attack, you'll quickly amass some easy money with this item. A tier. To that one commenter who commented this massive essay about Hourglass being in D tier, I salute you. I salute you so much that instead of rewriting this, I'm going to read your comment in its entirety. Here we go. Alright, Tur tier says, Hourglass is D tier at most. It might actually be F. People can just respond to the trigger and activate their item themselves, which I'm assuming you didn't know since you placed it in B. I didn't. Thanks. This makes it nearly 100% useless on any item that is best used on your own turn or any item that doesn't require precise timing to get good use out of. So this rules out any resource generating / value items and many of the big items like Chaos Card, Plan C, Mom's Shovel, etc. It could potentially be useful for disruption items like Gravity, for example, since if you roll a 2, they won't want to flip it, and it means you can flip the 4/6 you might get later, and if there's players between... You know what? You get it. This is a big-ass comment. Look, I'll show it. It's a lot. The issue with this is, like they said, instead of choosing to just watch the item get deactivated, you can respond to Hourglass by deactivating the item. Really, it's that simple. Hourglass is D tier. It's almost never useful. My bad. Didn't realize that. Yeah. Lard is an extremely powerful 2 health up, with a crippling downside. Each time you take damage, you discard a loot card. In situations where you already don't have many loot cards, this item can be amazing, but when you've got a lot in your hand to lose, this card can ruin games for you. It all depends on what you have when you get it, making it a very situational item. For all that, I'm giving this thing a B tier. It might be a massive help or a massive hindrance, and that makes me feel it belongs in the dead center. Magnet is a simple resource gain item, but due to its effects, it isn't the best one out there. While you have Magnet, whenever someone gains cents, they must give you 1 cent. This means a lot of people are going to be kind of annoyed with you, given you've just established an income tax in 4 souls. This can lead people being more likely to choose you to make an aggressive move on, all for you just taking cents from them. People being mad at you for stealing their pennies is just not really that worth it all the time. I can't deny you can get some money with this, but the hate that comes with it may not be worth it. B tier. Mom's Eyeshadow is absolutely amazing and causes whoever holds it to control so much of the game. When a player declares an attack on a monster, whoever holds this is allowed to choose what monster they attack with no penalty. This item was begged by fans to be reworked in version 2, but no dice. Controlling this allows you to force players into unwinnable fights, make them pay to attack monsters they want to attack, and all kinds of overpowered nonsense. The only way to avoid its effect is to attack the top card of a monster deck, which is inherently risky unless you have prior knowledge. By far one of, if not the best control item in the game. S tier. PhD is just handy. It allows you to add or subtract 1 to non-combat rolls. Being able to do this with every single non-combat roll means you are almost 3 times as likely to get the outcome you want. Pills and events will almost always benefit you while you hold this. A tier. Polyphemus gives you a straight 2 damage up at the cost of monsters having their dice rolls increased by 1 when it's your turn. This helps you defeat tankier, not super hard to hit monsters who you don't want to risk attacking for too long, but it might impair you against monsters who are already hard to hit, making attacking them even harder. It's up to you whether you want to take the risk, but the payoff can be well worth it. A helpful hint, if you have this, try and get an item like meat to offset the dice roll problem. then you've got some real fun stuff to work with. A tier. Rubber Cement allows you to roll whenever you miss an attack. If you roll a 1 through 3, you get to deal damage to a monster or player of your choice. This allows you to make back on a missed attack 50% of the time, or if you're attacking a monster you think you can handle, deal damage to an especially weak monster you aren't attacking, allowing the possibility of killing 2 monsters in 1 turn. Of course, you can also use this item to deal damage to other players, making this item powerful and versatile. A tier. This item can just always come in handy. Telepathy for Dummies grants you the ability to roll a dice roll at the start of your turn for this item. You may then substitute your next roll this turn with that roll if you feel like it. This item's usefulness depends on what you roll and the situation you use that roll in. I could go into how higher rolls benefit combat, or some events benefit lower rolls more, but it's better just to say this item might help you out, and it also might not. C tier, just kind of, okay. Just like in the video game, the whiz is a horrible excuse for an item. Monsters gain 1+ dice roll on your turn while you hold this, and in exchange, each time you deal damage, you can deal it to another monster or player? The dice roll increase is just not worth that. Yes, you can use it to deal damage to weaker monsters or harass players, but again, this item is not even close to worth it. For almost all intents and purposes, this item is essentially a worse version of soy milk, an almost equally as bad item. Purchasing this is almost a guaranteed misplay. D tier. 2020, wow, starting the actives for 4 Souls Plus off strong, eh? Being able to add up to 2 to an attack roll is fantastic, and can really save your butt in a bad situation. Widening the window of success by 33% is a great example of a good item, but sadly this item only affects attack rolls. Still, fantastic to have around, and you will get so much use out of this. S tier. Black Candle cuts 6 cards deep into the monster deck, revealing them to other players. Then you are allowed to give any curses to whoever you want before throwing all the other cards away. This is mostly used as a weirdly inconsistent aggressive item, or something to clear out the top 6 cards of the monster deck. Clearing out that top 6 cards can definitely be of use, especially if there's a certain undesirable card in there. But besides that, this card is way too inconsistent to be ranked any higher than C tier. Distant Admiration allows you to choose a player, and that player then gives you one of their loot cards, which you must then play without using a loot play. What makes this item so handy is that using it does not cost you a loot play, but allows you to play a random loot card. So, even if you'll get the worst loot card a player has, you'll be able to gain its effect without using a loot play, not depriving yourself of options. Another thing to think about is that you have just deprived a player of a resource without using any resources yourself, if resources in this situation are loot cards. A lot of people underrate this card. Honestly, I think it's A tier, just all around useful due to that no loot play deal. Divorce Papers are a single-use item that allows you to choose a player and nab half their money and loot cards rounded down, and then they give you an item. Being able to deprive a player of that many resources is incredible. The strongest part of this item is its effect on loot cards. Using this on a stacked player can cripple them for the remainder of the game and give you a massive edge to win. You can also use this on a player with only one item, forcing them to give you that single item, which is always handy. This item can really turn the tide of a game in an instant, just don't let it get butterbeaned. S tier. Forget Me Now is only really used when the user has 0 souls or is a last-ditch effort to prevent someone else from winning. I have seen this single-use item extend games by hours, so it's no surprise it isn't too well liked. That's kind of all this item does, extends the game by destroying one of each player's souls. Gives you more time to rise up and win, it's whatever, B tier. Head of Krampus really isn't that great. When used, you roll with a 50% chance of dealing 1 damage to all monsters or all players, including you. This item happens to be both situational and risky. Not a good combo. You could try and use this aggressively in the late game or for doing extra attack damage, but since both have a chance of failing, this gets a C tier. Attacking players and attacking monsters are totally different situations. It doesn't really help the item that it's all up to chance. Libra is okay. Changing a dice roll to a 3 can help in a decent amount of ways, like with some pills and events. It can help you get a winning attack roll on a monster with 3 dice roll or less, or bring down another player attacking something higher than that. Like the role this item changes dice rolls to, this item is sorta middle of the road. B tier. Mutant Spider is one of the best dice manipulation items in the game. When used, it allows you to reroll a dice roll with 4 dice, allowing you to choose the result out of the 4. This makes this item super versatile, as you are super likely to get whatever roll you want with this, whether it's for an event, an attack, or another item. This will definitely help you a shit ton. One problem with this item though, you cannot react with this item. It states the next time a player would roll a dice, meaning you cannot use this to alter a bad roll. In addition to this item can actually be countered by any item or prompt that makes someone roll a dice. If someone uses this, someone could respond with something as lowly as a butt penny and waste its effect. This makes it a little worse, but still, this item takes an S tier spot. Rainbow Baby benefits all players. When used, all players can either loot 1, which is great, gain 2 cents, which is okay, or take 1 damage, which can be used for risky aggressive plays. This item is risky to use sometimes, as using it will either strengthen other players as much as it strengthens you, or deprive other players as much as it deprives you. The ability to kill other players with this does make it quite useful in the late game, but again, it does put you at risk when you use it like that. B tier. Red Candle is a bit like an attack-based crystal ball. When used, you choose a number between 1 or 6. Till the end of the turn, whenever that number is rolled, you deal 1 damage to a monster or player. While it is versatile, it is also very inconsistent, and you may or may not get good use out of this. It's up to fate. However, since its attack lasts till the end of turn, you may have many more opportunities to roll the number you picked, and for that, I'll give it A tier. Smart Fly is another handy-dandy informational item that allows you to take a peek at the top card of a deck, and if you wish, put it at the bottom of a deck. In addition to this item recharges every time you take damage, meaning you'll be able to keep tabs on cards coming into play very frequently. This card nets you an above average amount of control over the decks with just how often you can use it, and I'm surprised more people don't recognize that. This gets a B tier. Atame can be a very dangerous aggressive card that can sap resources from other players at the cost of your own. This paid item requires a loot card to be used, and when it is used, you force a player to discard 2 loot cards. Discarding 2 loot cards for every time you use this can be massive, and you can easily flush a player's hand if you have a couple bad loot cards to use. This item is much more powerful than people give it credit for, but it will definitely make you a huge target. A tier. Another haunt item to finish things off. While you hold this, your character does not recharge at the start of your turn. This usually makes you unable to play loot cards in the off turn, making you vulnerable and easy to mess with. This item sucks and has no upside. It's a haunt item. Remember, if you can sacrifice or destroy this in any way, you probably should. F tier. Able is an item which has a simple but very powerful effect. Each time you deal combat damage, you roll. If you roll a 4 through 6, you deal 1 damage to another monster or player. The key word here is another. This means you cannot deal damage to the monster you are attacking. This means it lends itself well to damaging low health monsters, or better yet, damaging other players. This item works best in the late game, as there may not always be a monster with low health enough for you to use this on, but there's always a player who you can threaten. Even so, it can still manage to kill other monsters and players on occasion, so this gets an A tier. Alabaster Box can be one of the most rewarding items to hold on to in the long term. The issue, of course, being that you need to hold on to this item for a long time to make use of it. The reason this is so difficult is because this item usually does not affect the game in any way outside of its bursts of resource gain. This item states that a counter is put on it when your turn starts, meaning you'll likely have to wait a rotation to even get your first counter. Once this reaches 2 counters, you are awarded 10 cents, which basically makes the item pay for itself if you bought it and can hold on to it long enough. At 4 counters, you gain 4 loot, which is also very strong. This sudden burst of loot is fantastic, and if you plan on getting this item, you should always strive to get this reward if you can, as it can really expand your options by a wide margin. If you can manage to get a total of 6 counters on this thing, your patience will be greatly rewarded by 2 treasures. Gaining 2 treasures is obviously huge, but past this point, this item has no use. The big issue is, due to the nature of the game, what you get out of this is almost entirely up to chance. You could not attack to cause less risk, but that would lead to stagnation, meaning you'll likely fall behind. This item is, at its core, a powerful, yet inconsistent resource gain item. B tier. Backstabber is one of the first of a few attack a player items. It states that you may attack players who have more souls than you do for 3+ dice roll, which is a pretty good dice roll. It also adds a reward to attacking players, which automatically makes it more viable than many other forms of attacking players. If you kill a player, you loot one. This side effect is not limited to attacks, so if you are prone to betraying your friends, you might want this for a little bonus. At its core though, attacking players is not always the best play, due to the fact that you don't get very many resources from it. Add in the fact that attacking a player counts as your one attack you get each turn, and you see why these items aren't used super often. This means you'll usually see players start to utilize this in the late game more than the early game. In all, it's just an okay late game tool that a lesser player can use to bring down someone who might be winning. C tier. Ball of Band-Aids is alright. Preventing all combat damage on a roll of 3 is not a bad roll to prevent damage for, but there are definitely better rolls to prevent damage for. This obviously comes into play against monsters that have a 4+ dice roll or more, while remaining useless against anything less. Despite this, it still alleviates risk against difficult monsters, which is definitely welcome. A tier. Blood Puppy is a passive item that grows stronger each time a player dies, but can become hazardous if too many people die. Each time someone dies, this gains a counter. Once it gains 4, you gain +1 damage, which we've talked about before. Extra damage is fantastic to have on hand, but it only gets better from here. At 8 counters, you are allowed to deal 1 damage to a monster or player at the start of your turn. This allows you to weaken players or get a head start on an attack, among other things. Sadly, this is where the good things end. If this manages to get 10 counters, beware. You must roll at the start of your turn, with a 1 through 3 resulting in instant death. At this point, unless you have some dice manipulation, this item is particularly risky to hold on to, and a cautious player might choose to sacrifice it somehow. If you like to live dangerously, however, it still does have its powerful effects if you are willing to risk it. A tier. Bobby Bomb is a wildly inconsistent, but nonetheless highly highly effective form of resource gain. When this is gained or purchased, you reveal the top 10 cards of the loot deck, take any of them that have bomb in their name for yourself, and stuff the rest at the bottom of the deck. This, as good as it may seem, is not the part of the item that matters. Sure, you might get a boatload of bombs to play for later, but you also might get squat. The real use of this item is its secondary effect. At the start of your turn, put a card with the word bomb in its name from the loot discard into your hand. This means if someone has played a bomb, any bomb at all, at any point in the game, you now get to grab it from the discard, and you can use it and repeat this process every single rotation. With the existence of cards like Mega and Golden Bomb, you see how this card can be exceptionally strong. This card gets an S tier for how easily you can stack your hand with off-turn damage and risk alleviating potential. Chocolate Milk states that at the start of your turn, a counter is put on this. Then, if the item has 3 counters or more, remove them and deal 1 damage to a monster or player. Dealing this damage every so often is alright, but the real power of this item comes from this fun stat. While this has 2 counters on it, you have +1 damage. This means right before you can deal some damage for free, you get a turn where you have +1 damage and can thus obliterate some monsters. We've already talked about how powerful damage can be, and although this may be a weird item, it offers us some powerful tools. A tier. Consolation Prize is one of a few new types of items I like to call the I am not doing good, but hey, this will help items. While you hold this, you loot X at the start of your turn, X being equal to the amount of souls the player with the most souls has subtracted by yours. This, of course, means that this item is only useful to you if you are doing poorly. It's still useful if you aren't doing well, but I wouldn't look this item's way if I was quickly rising to first. Due to its inherent inconsistency, this gets a B tier. Damocles. Is it Damocles? Damocles? Hang on, I'm gonna look this up. Alright, it was Damocles. Damocles is just as legendary in the card game as it is in the video game, but without the terrifying punishment of instant death the video game taints it with. While you hold this, anytime you gain a treasure, you gain however many treasures you would gain, +1. This means when you buy a treasure, or get one from a reward, you get 2 treasures instead of 1. Double the treasures, double the fun. The only issue with this item is upon death, this item destroys itself independent of the death penalty. This means it can be difficult to keep around for a long period of time, but still, getting even 1 use out of this item makes it well worth nabbing for yourself, netting this item in S tier. Firemind reminds me of Cursed Eye, as in this item is pretty much just a worse version of Cursed Eye. It doubles your attack damage on a roll of 6 for starters, compared to how Cursed Eye adds 3 damage to attacks on a roll of 6. On a roll of 1, attack damage taken is doubled, usually resulting in instant death. Compared to Cursed Eye's simply ending your turn, this item kind of pales in comparison to it. I'm giving this a B. Here it is, the card you've all been waiting for, and a card I have discussed many times before, Gnawed Leaf. A card despised by many for its raw defensive power that can halt almost any form of player interference known to man. Let's take a look at its first stat. You can take no damage while it is not your turn. Every monster that damages all players has no effect on you while it isn't your turn. This means that the Bloat, Wrath, Evil Twin, and even any item that deals damage is completely void if it tries to hurt you when it is not your turn. Being immune to off-turn damage is powerful enough. We could stop the item right here and get an S tier, but guess what? There's more. The first time each turn, if another player plays a loot card that targets you or something you control, you may cancel it. The first time each turn. Not only can you do this each turn, notice how it says something you control. This means you can cancel something that affects your dice rolls, loot cards, and items. With this item, you are effectively immune to off-turn meddling, as you hold the ultimate player defense item. If you see this item, grab it as quickly as you can, and you'll be able to protect yourself from just about anything, as long as another player starts it. This item has the high honor of being the only non-single use or instant kill item to gain the rank of SS tier. Yes, it is that good. Halo of Flies is just, infamy with more words. As I write this, I cannot think of any instance you would miss an attack roll of 6, but you know what? Maybe there's some hyper-specific interaction I am missing. Let me go check real quick. Okay, I'm back. Wow, I learned something super cool about no damage on roll items, something you might need to know. These items can actually work defensively, meaning if someone makes an attack on you, these items will work against them. For example, if someone rolls a 6 when attacking you and you're holding this, it doesn't hurt you. When and if you can, point this out. It's super useful when it does come into play. This item gets an S tier. I've already talked about how useful preventing damage on a roll of 1 is, and adding this new feature to it only makes things better for Halo of Flies, and all other prevent on a roll items. Handicapped Play Card is another catch-up item that works similarly to the first, this time to an arguably much more stronger effect by reducing the dice roll required to hit monsters proportional to how far behind you are from the lead. When it is your turn while you hold this, monsters have -X dice roll, where X is equal to the amount of souls the player with the most souls controls, proportional to the amount of souls you control. Basically, just like the first. If you are doing poorly, this helps a bunch. If you're doing well, this item does not help. This item gets an A tier. Its effect is quite powerful, but it only works if someone has more souls than you, and with the attack buff it gives you, you won't likely hold on to this for too long. Judas's Shadow is a passive item that can help you take a massive leap ahead of the competition in terms of resources, if its conditions are met. If you die while holding this, 2 counters are put on it before paying penalties. When this item is destroyed, you gain 1 cent and 1 loot for every counter that was attached to it. This means if you can manage to hold onto this for more than 1 death, you can build up a piggy bank of loot and cash just waiting to be smashed open at the right time. You can even reap rewards for it if you sacrifice it with the death penalty, as its counter effect comes into play before paying the death penalty. This item can turn tides with the potential burst of resources it offers. A tier. Keeper's Box allows you to benefit from people purchasing items from the shop, in addition to making the shop more enticing to players by expanding it by 2 when it enters play. While you control this, each time another player buys a shop item, you gain 2 cents and loot 1. This is pretty good, considering that the shop has been expanded to 4 items at least due to this thing's other effect. If all the items in the shop happen to suck, you might be shit out of luck, because purchasing from the top of the treasure deck does not count as purchasing off the shop. I'm gonna put this in B tier. It's alright, but people buying shop items isn't the most consistent thing to bet on in the world, and 2 cents in a loot isn't the biggest amount of resource to gain. Lil Chest is an item that gives you a random positive effect each time you kill a monster. When a monster is killed by you, you roll. A 1 or 2 nets you 2 cents, which is okay. A 3 or 4 allows you to loot 2, which is great, but then you have to place a loot card from your hand on top of the deck, so it's like, it's not the best. And a 5 or 6 recharges all your items. As we have discussed earlier, you may not have items to recharge, but if you do, boy howdy, this is what you go for. This item is just nice to have around, although it would be much better if that 1 or 2 got you a little more pennies. Just saying. B tier. Lodestone is an item that is occasionally helpful, but it can also give other players an advantage you may not want them to have. It states that whenever a player rolls a 3, you choose a monster. That monster gets -1 dice roll until the end of turn. Now pardon my math here, but let's think. There are typically 4 players in a game of 4 souls, and only one of them is you. This item causes an immediate benefit to whoever's turn it is if they roll a 3, unless they cannot attack or there's a monster too imposing to attack, even with the -1 dice roll. Or if they're already attacking a monster, you know. This item seems to help other players almost as much as it helps you in some situations, and as someone who realizes there can be only one winner, I find that problematic. You could monetize this item if you really think giving another player such an advantage is a good idea, but I digress. This item, while powerful, does not help its user enough to justify how frequently other players can take advantage of it. C tier. Lunch is S tier, it's a health up, there's really not much to explain here. Mom's bottle of pills is like a much more inconsistent version of Bobby Bomb, because pills, unlike bombs, have negative effects and are also very inconsistent. It works in the exact same manner Bobby Bomb does, so not much new info there, other than it searches for pills instead of bombs. Still, being able to consistently reuse and gain played loot cards, even if they are pills, leads to some good things. It may surprise you given what I've said to rank this as A tier, but due to how valuable loot can be, even if it is pills, makes this treasure much more useful than you might think. Play-Doh Cookie is an item that I'm gonna have to do some math for. It states that at the start of your turn you may add or remove a counter from a non-eternal item, which can be pretty strong, or gain 1 cent, which sucks. Let me tally up how many counter items this affects real fast. 30. Counting the situations where Birthright applies because I like to be generous. Even then, out of 263 total items, that amounts to around 12% of treasures that will be affected by this. To be fair, most of the treasures affected by this are like really affected, really improved, like Alabaster Box, Tech X, good stuff. Still, even with this in mind, it's really hard to shake the feeling of 12% of treasures. It's a very small number, so B tier it goes. Punching Bag may be one of the best health ups in the game, mostly because it gives you 2 health instead of 1, with the downside being people can choose to attack Punching Bag to try and get rid of it. Given that it has a 5+ dice roll though, that is easier said than done. Most players won't dare to waste an attack on this in the late game due to a need for souls being so prominent that time, so lucky you. This item gets an S tier, but it is certainly the best health up of the bunch by far, at least in my opinion. Rock Bottom, ironically enough, benefits you much more when you've managed to find it when you are doing well. When you gain or purchase it, it gains counters equal to the amount of loot cards in your hand. At the end of your turn, if you have less loot cards than counters on the item, you loot 2. Yes, 2. Looting 2 makes this card crazy good if you can get it when you have a higher amount of loot cards, as you'll always be gaining loot at the end of your turn. The only issue is if you gain this when you actually are at rock bottom, as in pretty low amount of loot cards, you won't be able to benefit from this almost at all. I am putting this in S tier because the loot gain this thing can accomplish can be kind of insane at times. Splunker Hat is a pretty strong and simple deck searching item. At the start of your turn, you may look at the top 3 cards of any deck and rearrange them in any order you wish. Holding on to this basically makes you a budget Kane, which is pretty awesome all things considered. Being able to decide what loot cards you get at the start of each turn, or seeing what rooms might be coming up next is a super strong ability to have, and for that, I am putting it in A tier. Trick Penny allows you to spend less money on things, almost all things. Shop items cost 1 cent less, as do paid items, which can give you some fun synergies. On top of all of that, you gain a penny back whenever you purchase an item and at the end of your turn. All this cash you save and gain can really add up, but this item isn't exactly super without a paid item to use with it. With this considered, this is going in B tier. Ultra Flesh Kid looks a lot better on paper than it actually is. Every time something dies, this gets a counter. Wow, this means you'll get a counter around every turn, aiming for that reward of a free soul. The issue with this soul is, do you really think you can survive long enough to gain it? This item needs 12 counters to become a soul, and that's a lot. Other than the soul you'll eventually get, this item does not help you at all, barring that one specific synergy with cubes of meat. Saying it would be difficult to go at most around 3 full rotations without dying or this getting stolen would be an understatement. For that, this gets a B tier. It's still a soul if you can manage to keep it alive, but unfortunately, most players can't seem to hold on to this fleshy guy for too long. The Auction Gavel allows you to basically sell shop items to bidding players for profit. When used, you choose a shop item and offer it up at a cent or more. Then, each player may bid higher and higher in turn order. The bidding is over and the item is sold when the high bid stands. Then, you get the amount of cents offered and the bidder gets the item. Everyone wins! This item is not only a great way to make yourself some easy money, but it can also help you clear out some items from the shop you don't really want. The only issue, you are statistically getting other players cheap items while only getting money for yourself. Benefiting other players isn't always the most worthwhile option, but the money you can get by using this item is quite enticing. B tier. Birthright is either a fantastic and godly extension of your character's power, or it is completely useless depending entirely on the character you are playing. Most of the time though, this item is fantastic, as around only 5 characters or so get no use out of this thing. The use some characters do get is varied of course, but considering eternal items are in general some of the most powerful items in the game, this item can really set you up for success. S tier. Book of the Dead. Boy did I get this wrong. Book of the Dead is basically just the shovel, but a little different. It allows you to sift through the discard and put a non-event monster into a slot not being attacked. This basically means you can use this item to cover monsters you don't want to deal with. Does my ranking on it change? Not really. This item is C tier, just slightly different version of the shovel. Whether it's better or worse is up to you. Eternal D6 is I need to stop saying these like Nostalgia Critic. Is that just me? Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. Eternal D6. You can put counters on it by tapping it, and you can spend 2 of these counters to cause a 2 or 3 to become a 1 until the end of turn. Obviously, this has its aggressive uses, but it also has some uses you might be able to take advantage of, like making a certain outcome more likely. These uses are a bit hard to justify sometimes though, as the effect does not just change the dice roll, it activates for the entire turn, meaning you probably shouldn't use this if you've not attacked yet. This item synergizes particularly well with items that prevent damage on a roll of 1, so if you have those, be sure to pick them up. I'm putting this in B tier. It has some aggressive use and some niche use and useful synergies, but the lack of general use brings it down just a bit. Experimental treatment is just great. As long as you don't roll a 1 or technically a 3, every one of these rewards you could gain by using this single item are just swell. Obviously, what you're going for here is the soul upon rolling a 6, and if you have a way to manipulate dice rolls, this becomes much more useful. This single use item gets A tier. In my experience, this item is nearly exclusively used to attempt to kill other players, and it isn't even the best at it. When you first use Friendly Ball, you take a monster not being attacked and shove them under it. The next time it is used, you toss the monster back into a slot, and the active player must take an extra attack on it this turn. If you are not using a Friendly Ball to grab a monster and throw it at a player later, you could use it to hang on to a monster you would like to attack later, or to make sure other players can't kill something that would help them. This is Friendly Ball's true use, grabbing monsters you'd prefer to attack and potentially killing them and another monster on your turn. Next time you get this, try to use it to your benefit instead of somebody else's dismay. B tier. Friendly Sack has the potential to help you out with its best of 3 loot cards mechanic, but it also has the potential to help someone else out more than it would you. When you use this item, you take a peek at the top 3 cards in the loot deck. After that, you snatch 1 for yourself and hand over the other 2 to another player. The other 2 part is what hurts this item. Giving 2 loot cards to another player isn't the best idea. Sure, you'll be getting the best of 3 loot cards when using this, but what if you dig up 3 really good loot cards? Then you're forced to toss 2 of them away to benefit someone else, which isn't something you want. Due to how this item has a tendency to help other players more than you would want it to, I have to delegate this item to B tier. Hand-me-downs is an item that can give you a whole lot of less than average loot cards in return for allowing other players to draw off the top of the deck. When you use this item, each other player may draw off the top of the loot deck if they give you a loot card of their choice. This is a great deal for other players, as it means they can offload their poorer loot cards to you for the chance of a much better loot card. Because of this, most people will take the deal, meaning your hand may quickly fill up with lower than average loot cards, and that can actually be kinda helpful. Certain items and rooms cost loot cards to use, and you can use this item to take advantage of those. Without a synergy to take advantage of though, I do think this card benefits other players a little bit more than it benefits you. And for that, I'm giving this a C tier. Jar of Flies is a counter item that can be used to gain loot or deal damage, depending on how many counters you remove from it. This item gains a counter each time a monster dies, meaning you'll slowly but surely rake in the counters over the course of a game. When you tap this item, you can remove 1 or more counters from it, and in doing that, you gain a loot, which is nice. You can't spam use this without charges, however. Notice that this is a tap item, not a cost item. If you decide to remove 3 or more counters from this item, you will instead deal 1 damage to a monster. Dealing damage is great, no shocker there, so this adds up to be a pretty nifty item. A tier. Keeper's Penny is less of an item and more of a gameplay modifier. The first player to get their hands on this gains 9 cents. Neato! You can then tap it to put a counter on it and pass it to another player, and you gain money equal to the counters on it. This item will slowly enrich the players at the board as it quickly becomes a gilded hot potato everyone wants to hold on to. It's hard to rank an item like this, so I'll put it in A tier. It's fun, everybody likes it, no real problems here. Magic Skin is also more like a gameplay modifier than an item, and what a scary one it is. When used, this item gets you an item and then gains a counter. You then give this item to another player. However, at the start of your turn, if you hold this, you roll. If the dice roll is less than the amount of counters on the item and all other items you control are destroyed. This makes for a very dangerous game of hot potato. Nobody wants to be the one holding onto this when it goes boom, and you and your table are all forced to pass it around until it inevitably destroys a player's inventory. Be careful with this thing. I guess I would have to give this thing a B tier given the risks and rewards involved. Mama Mega is an extremely destructive single-use card that can wreak havoc on games by dealing 3 damage to every monster and player active. When used, it destroys itself, and then, like I said, deals 3 damage to every monster and player in play. This card is incredibly useful if the monster slots have been expanded, as this means you'll likely get more rewards from using this. The idea behind this item is to kill yourself, but also to gain as many rewards as you can in the process. You can also use this item for killing players, not like you have a choice in the matter. Speaking of killing players, most people will not be too happy that you've used this, as they've all died, and they all kind of hate you for killing them now. As such, you should always be prepared for the fallout of that, so to speak. For being an area damage single-use card that you can use to gain souls relatively easily, this gets an SS tier. Marbles continues what I said about Play-Doh Cookie, but it adds cards other than items to the mix of what can be affected by its repertoire. I do not care enough about marbles to look into how many cards in total that this affects, but being able to remove counters in addition to adding them makes this extremely useful when it comes into play. This gets C tier because it has no guaranteed effect, although when it does, its effect is more often than not very powerful. Member Card can allow you to take advantage of and sift through unknown cards in the treasure deck, and get items for 4 cents less if you buy from the shop. When used, Member Card allows you to look at the top 3 cards of the treasure deck, put them back in any order, and then put a shop item into discard. Basically meaning the item on top of the treasure deck will enter play. Using this in combination with your handy 4-cent discount means you'll be able to buy a lot of items other players would not even have the chance to buy. Member Card gets an A tier, almost solely because of its discount mechanic. Buying items for 6 cents is a pretty big deal, as anyone who controls this item will soon learn. I think I've only seen this item used once, and I don't think I'll see it used again for a long time. Of course, now that I say that, I'm sure some dweeb has the bright idea to use it themselves, and trust me, if you want the game to end instantly, go ahead. Using an item that destroys everyone's souls in anything but the early game pretty much guarantees a table-wide rage quit. Thankfully, like I just discussed, almost nobody actually uses this because resetting the progress of an entire game that's been going on for 2 hours is not something that typically is smiled upon. This item gets an SS tier for the ability to just make everyone stop playing the game. I really can't think of a more powerful item than that. Red Key allows you substantial control over the room and monster deck, although the one we'll be focusing on here is the room deck. When used, it states to look at the top 3 cards of either deck, and you may put one in a slot and the rest back. You can't use this during an attack, but that's okay, that's not what it's for. This is one of the very few items that has control over the room deck, since the entire card type of rooms was added so recently. Having control over a table-wide effect so easily is certainly powerful, but this item's power is amplified given that there are almost no other items that can affect the room deck, like I said. With this in mind, I am giving the Red Key an A tier. The Clicker, unlike in the video game where it is certainly the worst item by far, in 4 Souls, this item is heralded as one of the best, as it enables you to do something the game simply does not let you do normally. Pick what character you want to be. If you were dealt a sad, pathetic excuse for a character, the opportunity to change characters to one that fits the situation you are currently in is exemplary. You might be surprised about this placement, but this card is going in SS due to this one neat little trick I'm about to explain. If nobody is playing as the Lost, you can use this item to switch to him, gaining a free soul in the process. With this in mind, this already fantastic card has the potential to become a win condition. Yeah, SS. Undefined is pretty much a slightly worse copy of the Capricious' starting item. It becomes a copy of a shop item until the start of your next turn when used, and recharges itself just in case you copied an active item. Will this help you? Given that you can put a shop item into discard at the start of your turn, improving the chance you copy something worthwhile. Hopefully. While it is versatile, it is not consistent enough to be ranked higher than a B tier. Sorry. X-Ray Vision is an incredibly useful deck manipulation and informational item that can quickly allow you to decipher what each of your opponents has in their hands. When used, it allows you to look at a player's hand and the top card of a deck. You may then put the top card of the deck into discard if you so choose. To top it all off, this item recharges at the end of turn, meaning you'll be able to take advantage of this control quite often. For this astoundingly useful amount of control and knowledge this item grants you, it gets A tier. Information and control is powerful, but you need the tools to act on this information to win games. If this item granted you them, it would probably rise up to S. Battery Pack allows you to recharge all of your items about once every 2 turns if you feel so inclined. At the end of your turn, you put a counter on this. You are allowed to remove 2 counters to recharge every item a player owns. Now, I am sure you know all of my gripes with recharge items at this point, and I have made all the reasons they usually are not anything more than average super clear by now. Blah blah blah, you won't always have items to recharge, yada yada, they won't always be worth recharging, we all get it, these items are inconsistent, right? We get it. They require other active items to be effective, but that doesn't mean this item is bad. You can stack up a boatload of counters and use them all at once with this thing, which can be pretty helpful if you have the items to do that with. This still gets a B tier, but that doesn't make this item bad, it's just situational. Oh, goddammit, not again. Okay, screw it, this item is bad. The big issue with car battery is that it cannot be recharged by anything other than paying 7 cents to recharge it. This, shocker, sucks, and with the ability being able to recharge just 3 items in play, let's do the math. Needs 7 cents, plus 3 active items, plus active items that are worth using. No, this thing is horribly inconsistent. I would almost never take this. D tier. You do not need to be blowing 7 cents on this thing. No. Hallowed Ground is an item that seems a bit underwhelming. Oh, but I assure you, this item has some good uses. Whenever a 2 is rolled, this item gains a counter, and you can remove 3 counters from this to put the top card of the loot discard into your hand. This means that when you hold this, you can play the waiting game once you have the counters you need, waiting for someone to play a good loot card. Once they do, you can use this item to steal it right off the top of the discard. This comes in handy a lot more than you might think, I promise. Hallowed Ground gets itself an A tier. Try it out next time you see it. If you get it early, I promise you won't be disappointed. Keeper's Sack is an Eternal! F tier! This item sucks balls and is in a similar spot as annoying cards like Curse of the Soulless. It grants whoever gets it first 10 cents, but then slowly wanders across the board, stealing resources from everyone until the game ends. This item just makes me mad, and it should make you mad too. I usually don't remove or ban items from my games, but I don't argue when someone leaves this piece of garbage out. Pageant Boy might help you a shit ton, and it might not. As long as you roll a 3 or more when using this item will be worth buying. Hope you're feeling lucky. When used, you destroy this item and roll. You gain 4 times the amount of cents what you just rolled, meaning if you roll a 3, you'll get 12 cents, a 4 gets you 16 cents, and so on. Just roll and hope for that high number. A tier. Sacrificial Dagger gains a counter each time someone rolls a 1. You can pay 3 of these counters to deal 1 damage to a monster or player. This item is kind of a worse version of Mr. Boom. Like, it's reusable, it's a 1 damage to a monster, and it can hurt players too, but relying on 3 counters gotten via players rolling 1s kinda makes it a little worse, a little inconsistent. I mean, it's not a bad item at all, no, but chances are you won't be using this as frequently as something that has a guaranteed recharge. Again, it's not bad at all, 1 damage to monster or player is great, this gets an A tier, but I feel like the resemblance is, worth mentioning. The Jar allows you to pay 4 cents in exchange for preventing 1 damage to a player or monster. This is okay. If you have the money, you can make something effectively immortal, but chances are you don't have the money, and you are draining your wallet as a last resort by using this thing. It can prolong your life in combat or defend you from some off-turn meddling, but the cost it takes to use this thing consistently cannot be understated, and a smart player might exploit that. For now, it's going in B tier. Something I neglected to realize about Cursed Soul is that it almost never becomes a soul, as I did not realize it could be sacrificed as part of the death penalty. This means the item wanders from player to player, making them more susceptible to death, and when those players die, do you really think they'll be saving an item that may not even benefit them? Since this thing passes from player to player at the end of each turn, who's to say they'll even get to keep the soul? This thing goes in D tier, as yes, it's still technically possible you can gain a soul with this, but it's highly unlikely. Fetal Haunt is another card that does nothing but hurt you. At the end of your turn, you give another player a loot card. Like all Haunt items, this leads to trouble another player on death. As far as Haunt items, this one isn't so bad. In fact, I would consider it the best Haunt item, as it has the least damaging effect of the Haunts. Still, this thing is not something you want in your inventory. F tier. Deadeye is a pretty effective damage up item. It states that each time you deal damage to a monster, you gain +1 damage until the turn ends. This is not limited to attack damage, by the way, so a bomb or item will increase this number. This quick damage ramp is well worth an S tier, and I almost consider it like a high-risk, high-reward version of a damage up. Although honestly, the risk of dealing 1 damage isn't really that high. Marked is essentially a good version of Telepathy for Dummies. Being able to guarantee your first attack roll being at least a 5 is certainly very effective, as there are very few monsters with attack rolls higher than 5. If you can manage to combine this with a damage up, you can one-tap a decent amount of monsters. Marked gets an S tier for providing such a high amount of consistency to your attacks. Epic Fetus deals 1 damage to a monster, player, and yourself when used. The situation in which all 3 of these are needed will rarely crop up, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is that it can do all of these things, not that it should. The only issue with this item is the weak spot it puts you in after using it. Assuming you can't prevent the self-damage, the 1 health threshold is a very dangerous place to be, as other players can take advantage of it to make a play on ya. Anyway, this item still lands itself in A tier for that versatility. Little Gish allows you to choose an item in play that is deactivated. This item does not recharge at the start of its controller's next turn. This item is basically used just to permanently lock down an item from being used, and as such, this item is not looked upon too favorably. Luckily, this card is exceedingly rare, and you probably don't have it in real life. If you are playing online, that is a different story. This is an item that tends to make people mad, and if you use it frequently, it may come back to bite you. B tier. I do not give a rat's ass about the tapeworm items. I know people are gonna get angry about it, but I really don't. These items, I don't like them. I don't like reading this giant wall of text that means nothing. I don't like that they have specific counters that interact with each other in goofy ways. I wish they didn't exist, and every single time I play a game, I take them out. I am not ranking the tapeworm proglotids. Goodbye. Aubrey is a situational but powerful item that can allow you to gain a large amount of loot very quickly. Whenever you buy an item, you loot 3. Simple enough, this item works as advertised. Gaining 3 loot every time you buy a shop item is great, although I wish it wasn't limited just to shop items. Oh well. Given that you need to buy items to make this item worthwhile, I'm putting it in B tier. You won't always have the money to do that, and if you don't, you're just sitting at a card that doesn't do anything. Birthday Cake allows you and any other player to choose to loot 1 at the start of your turn. This is great. Not only do you get to loot 1 at the start of your turn, you can also allow other players to do the same, and if you want, you can barter with them for it. Getting to barter with players so easily is a powerful tool, and if you choose to do so, you can quickly rack up money, or get other players to use their items on your terms. Birthday Cake is going in S tier. Diogenes' Pot is a strong but risky item. Taking no damage on attack rolls of both 2 and 3 is very powerful, but dying on an attack roll of 1? That's not great, on that we agree. This item is far more powerful if you have some sort of saving throw or dice manipulation to get you out of that oops I rolled a 1 situation. I'll put this item in B tier, but it's a very strange type of defensive item, a risky defensive item. Take caution when using this. George is one of the strongest informational items in terms of the monster deck. Each time you declare an attack, you are allowed to check the top 5 cards of the monster deck and rearrange them in any order. This gives you so many options on what to attack, and when you're typically so limited in choices, that's huge. I'm giving this item an A tier, as cutting 5 cards deep every time you choose to attack something is just almost unbelievable sometimes. High Tops allows you to take no damage on attack rolls of 4 or 5. Like I said earlier, this is much more beneficial when a player chooses to attack you, but you'll find it coming in handy when attacking some higher roll monsters too. One last ability this item has, you can choose to grant its effects to other players at the start of their turns by high-fiving them. You can use this to be nice or charge some money for the effect, whatever floats your boat. I'm giving this item an A tier, just something nice to have around. Newgrounds Tank is an item that gives you both a damage and health up at a crippling price. Seeing both a Delph and Hamage up, I bet you're thinking, wow, what could possibly offset that? Monsters have +1 dice roll on your turn. Yeah. Does not seem so appealing now, does it? In all seriousness, adding 1 dice roll to monsters when it's time to attack is really bad. But the stat ups are really good, so this kind of falls into B tier due to that risk and reward factor. I don't consider this item bad, but I do think about whether I really want it whenever I see it. Can I stand that making monsters hard to hit effect? Can I? Can I? Yes? No? Depends from game to game. Another damage up, S tier. Nothing to discuss here, other than the fact that you get an additional damage up if you control no other items, which now that I write that down, that's pretty crazy. 3 damage is enough to 2-shot almost every monster in the game. If you're crazy enough, maybe you'll throw away all the items you've been blessed with and try going full steam ahead with this. Or, of course, you found this early, have no other items, so you don't have to sacrifice a damn thing. In that case, destroy all you can before it's too late. Like I said, S tier. Boxing Glove allows you to put monsters not being attacked at the bottom of the monster deck. This basically means you can use this to banish monsters from the game forever. This can help you cycle through the monster deck, especially adding that it recharges every time a monster dies. You'll be able to use this thing very frequently to control the monster deck, and you should. Control is good when you have it. I'm putting this in A tier due to how effectively and consistently you can use this thing. Doorway is an item that allows you to just flush active monsters, rooms, or shop items to get new ones. That's it. Given that it can affect the room deck, something very few cards are allowed to do, I gotta put this in A tier. You may disagree, but trust me, having power over rooms is very strong and very rare. The gun that can kill the past is essentially an item version of the sun, which can be used on any turn to benefit you. You can also use it to cancel anything you don't want happening as well, which is quite handy. Taking an extra turn outside the turn order is pretty sweet, no problems there, but you need to make sure you can make the most of what you're given. This item isn't all that effective all by its lonesome, and you'll likely need some other items to help you take advantage of this free turn. It still gets an A tier. A single-use item that can cancel events and grant you a new turn, you know that sounds good. Water Bottle is a goofy little meme item, and unlike most meme items, I actually kind of like this one. When you use this, you roll. A 1 through 3 makes you roll again, a 4 allows you to deal 1 damage to a monster or player and then roll again, a 5 allows you to deal the same thing without the roll again, and a 6 ends your turn, if it is your turn, and cancels everything that hasn't been resolved. The idea with this item is to roll as many 4s as you can, hopefully enough to kill a monster. Given that this can end your turn though, I recommend you use this as a bonus once you've finished your attack. You can use it before if you want, but don't whine when your turn gets cut off. This may be a little controversial too, but I'm going to put this one in A tier. It has real potential if you roll well, and I love using this item. It's just a bundle of fun. Sir Junkin allows you to discard loot cards to level up this item. With 4 discarded, you gain a health up. With 8, monsters have -1 attack roll on your turn, which is super, but hard to get to. With 10 or more, you get one final ability. Take no damage on combat rolls of 1 or 2, which as we have discussed is super. Discarding loot cards is not always the best play, but this item's effects are quite powerful. I would suggest that you don't focus on this item, occasionally just discarding a card or 2 if you can. If you focus on it, I guarantee you'll discard more than you should, leaving yourself in a situation you really shouldn't be in. I'm giving this card a B tier, as in all honesty, it's not likely you'll reach anything above that level 4 buff. Spewer basically allows you to transform any loot card into a pill, for free! If you play a loot card, you roll. A 1 through 2 nets you a 1 health until the end of turn, a 3 to 4 nets you a damage till the end of turn, and a 5 or 6 makes you take 1 damage. A neat little side effect about this item, if the loot you discard is a pill, you get to roll 3 times. Neato! Due to the risk factor this item presents, it gets a B tier. It isn't half bad, but you run the risk of crippling your turn when you use it, which is not something you want. The Crowdfunder is a beautiful item you can do some funny things with if you have the cash to support it. You may pay 2 cents to use it, and then you roll. Rolling a 1 or 2 gets you a 3 or 4 lets you deal 1 damage to a player, and a 5 or 6 lets you deal damage to a monster. Using this item over and over is usually the way to cause some damage, to both kill monsters, players, and your wallet. This item is funny, but it gets a B tier. Keep this item far away from the table joker. They are certain to kill you with it. Alt Epic Fetus allows you to deal 1 damage to all monsters and then yourself. The issue is you usually do not need to deal 1 damage to every monster, and you also usually don't want to deal 1 damage to yourself. This results in an item that is used to finish off monsters if you haven't taken any damage this turn. I'm not saying you'll never find a use for dealing damage to every monster, but I will say it's pretty damn unlikely. It deals damage to monsters though, so A tier is where it goes. What can you do? Alt Godhead, also known as Captain Viridian's starting item but worse, is a great item. It turns bad rolls into good rolls and good rolls into bad rolls, as a 1 becomes a 6, a 2 becomes a 5, a 3 becomes a 4, and vice versa. This item is not as powerful as the OG Godhead, but is still definitely deserving of S tier. There isn't much to explain here. Flipping dice rolls is just extremely powerful. Alt Guppy's Paw works a bit like the empty starting item, but with health. You can use it to destroy an item you control, gaining 1 health for each one you sacrifice, as long as you hang on to the paw. This item requires a little bit of time and resources to become effective, and although I didn't forget how it counts towards the soul of Guppy, I do think it belongs in A tier. Destroying items is inherently risky when you could lose everything you destroyed with 1 stray point of damage at the wrong time. It's still a good item, but it's risky. G Fuel, not much to explain here. 1 health recharges your character at the end of your turn, allowing you to play more loot during your turn, while still being able to play cards in the off turn. S tier, it's a health up, not much to say. Isaac's Tears is a pretty swell item. Each time you roll a dice, this gains a counter. Once it has 6, you may spend them to deal 1 damage to each other monster and player. Gaining counters for this item is easy, and it gets even easier if you have items that allow you to roll a dice when used. If you have one of these, you'll be able to accumulate counters very quickly. While dealing 1 damage to everything isn't always what you want to do, it's easy to save up counters past the 6 needed and spin them all to nuke the entire board. Even if you don't want to do that, you can still use this as a makeshift rechargeable bomb, which hey, is quite strong. I'm giving this item an A tier, just something you'll always be able to make use of. Red G Fuel is not as good as its predecessor, due to the fact that instead of a stat boost, it recharges an item. However, you can also tap it to recharge a character, and in theory, you can use its end of turn recharge to recharge itself. Now that I say it out loud, this item might be a lot better than I thought. With it, you can recharge your character twice a rotation outside the beginning of turn recharge. Being able to be that responsive or recharge items if need be sounds pretty powerful. A tier. Well, S tier. This damage up has a pretty sweet additional effect too. Being able to deal 1 damage to a monster or player each time you roll a 6, even outside of combat, makes this one of, if not the best damage up item out there. G Fuel Brimstone is something else. Glitter Bombs are a bit of a weird item. Using them makes you play with the top card of the loot deck revealed until the end of turn, and you are allowed to play the top card of the deck until the end of turn as if it was in your hand. I feel like this is an overcomplicated item, one that makes me think, wouldn't it just be better if I simply owned the loot card on top of the deck? Wouldn't it be better if I could just play it without using a loot play? Questions like this allowed me to put this item in C tier. It offers not enough to be worth purchasing in most situations. My Little Unicorn is an item that is superb, but doesn't look that way on first glance. When used, it prevents all damage you would take until the end of turn, but when you will roll a 1 through 3 this turn, you cancel everything that has not been resolved and end the turn. Something of note, you can use this outside of your turn to both cancel lethal damage and end other players' turns. If you have a way to roll, you can use this in conjunction with it, and upon rolling a 1 through 3, it will end the turn. Being able to end other players' turns is nothing to be understated, and I am surprised more people have not picked up on this. As for on-turn applications, this is good for when you are 1 hit from death and just say, fuck it, I hope I can make the rest of this attack without rolling low. If you do, fantastic. If not, boo. You still live at the end of it all, so why not use it? This might be a little controversial, but I'm putting this in S tier. People should talk about this item more, it's amazing. $3 Bell is a strong item, and it doesn't take a genius to see that. Upon dealing damage to a monster or player, you roll. A 4 through 5 allows you to heal 1, which can be helpful when you're attacking a monster that has damaged you, while rolling a 6 allows you to add 1 to the damage you've already dealt to the player or monster. Having a 50% chance of one of these positive effects is definitely a worthwhile investment, and I wouldn't pass on this if I saw it. However, it is a luck-based item, and sometimes you get unlucky. Still, I think an A tier ranking fits this item. Its usefulness in both monster and player combat cannot be understated. Ah, the cubes of meat. They're all about the same, preventing damage on a roll of 1, 2, and 3, and providing an additional effect if combined with one of their kin or Ultra Flesh Kit. These certainly are not bad items, but there's really not much to talk about with these. The prevent damage on a roll of 1 cube is probably the best of the 3, and you'll likely not see the cubes synergize with each other ever, because there's only 3 of them. On the off chance you can make it happen, I beg you to do it. The cubes of me together can be stronger than you could possibly imagine. Anyway, S tier, A tier, A tier. Eden's Soul is a powerful single-use item that starts uncharged. Once used, you look at the top 7 cards of the treasure deck, pick 2 for yourself, and then put the rest at the bottom in any order. This can be crazy powerful, and buying this item is almost always worth it. The only issue is the obscenely rare chance that all 7 items are crap, but even then, you get 2, so who cares? S tier. Seraphim is a worse version of a dice roll up. He increases your dice roll by 1 on your 1st, 3rd, and 5th attack rolls, and that's pretty good. It's still a dice roll increase, even if it is an inconsistent and kind of a sucky one. This gets an A tier, because like I said, a dice roll increase is a dice roll increase. The Stairway is a little like a passive version of Eden's Soul, in that each time you buy an item, you are allowed to look 7 cards deep in the treasure deck before you choose what item to purchase. You know, 240 something cards into this series, and wouldn't you know it, I'm running out of ways to say cards are good or bad. We'll just put this one in S tier and hope no one complains. Mom's Heals allow you to attack an additional time on your turn, and negate the first instance of combat damage you would take each turn. Making an additional attack is a much more powerful thing than people give it credit for, and as such, I'll be placing this in A tier. Add in that the first instance of attack damage you take is nullified, meaning you can survive a hit against monsters who would usually kill you instantly, and you've got an item that isn't half bad. Mom's Lipstick grants you an additional attack on your turn, and adds +1 to the first attack roll you make each turn, meaning your first attack is likely to be successful. I've probably explained it somewhere before, but let me tell you again why attacking more than once is so great. The card game, 4 Souls, is balanced around players getting 1 chance to attack each turn. When you can attack more, you can kill more monsters, which allows you to gain more rewards and potentially more souls. Having the opportunity to regularly attack more than you normally should on your turn means you have the potential to amass more resources and souls faster than other players, meaning you'll win faster. Anyway, this item is good. A tier. Mom's Underwear grants you an additional attack on your turn, but for your second attack you make each turn, you deal +2 damage, which is huge. I've already said that 3 damage is enough to 2-shot most monsters in the game, and I doubt I need to repeat it. If you can make that second attack, victory is quite likely. The issue is, that second attack is almost always going to be a little risky. You might take some damage in the first one, and that will carry over to the second. With that in mind, this gets an A tier. Satanic Bible allows you to pay 1 heart to prevent an instance of damage a monster would take this turn. This is mostly used in the late game to make game-winning kills harder to achieve. This item typically doesn't see play until the late game, and even then this item remains risky to use. By the late game, a good player knows that having some method of player control is almost necessary, and since this thing puts you in a risky spot, 1 health, you'll be making yourself an easy target for other players. If this item used loot cards or sense to work, it wouldn't have this problem, but since this item both makes people mad at you and puts you in a vulnerable spot, I do not think the reward is worth the risk of using this. C tier. The Mark is a damage up, and it allows you to attack other players, and they have a 5+ dice roll for the attack, the only problem being it curses you with the same thing. Although, due to having +5 dice roll and 2 damage, most players will not attack you, so that won't be a big issue. Attacking other players isn't something you'll be doing much of either. Again, that 5+ dice roll is usually not worth the effort. What is worth the effort is the damage. Damage up, S tier. Who cares? It's a damage up. It goes in S tier. The Nail allows players to be attacked until the end of turn, with a dice roll of 4 when used. In addition to this, each time a player is killed by another player, you loot 1. This item is okay. It will only really see use in the late game, and even then, it won't see too much use, as attacking players isn't the most popular option in comparison to attacking monsters, due to the lack of rewards offered. I feel like so many more people would attack each other if they got some kind of guaranteed reward when they did it. Like, whatever the player they killed would discard for the death penalty or something, but nay, no soul, no item, why bother? This item gets a C tier. It might help you later on, but it probably won't. Number 1 is a complete downgrade. There is almost no situation in which it is useful. It lures new players in with the stat line of, monsters have -1 dice roll on your turn. But then it screws them over with the fact that 1 and 6 now count as misses. Basically, this item changes nothing on its own, allowing 1 more dice number to hit monsters while taking 1 number that was once able to hit monsters away. This item is, in all, totally worthless. There are very few situations in which you would even consider taking it. Almost none. F tier. Number 2 allows you to deal 1 damage to a monster or player whenever a 2 is rolled. This, as long as you have better attention span than a goldfish, is really good. Dealing a damage each time a 2 is rolled to either weaken a monster or put another player in an unsafe position is just very good. Again, you need to be paying attention when you hold this. You'd be shocked just how many players will just miss most of their uses because they're looking at crap on their phone. I'm talking about me here. I had a game where I just straight up did not use this because I was f***ing around. I was foolish. I should be looking at the things in my inventory, not the things in my phone. Anyway, this item gets an A tier. You'll find yourself getting to use this quite often if you hang on to it. Little Delirium is... oh wow, that's a lot of words. Let's break this down. At the start of your turn, you take a look at the top 3 cards of the treasure deck and reveal one. This card becomes a copy of the selected card until the end of turn. You then put the other cards at the bottom of the deck in a random order. You know, I feel like Little Delirium would be much more useful if it lasted until the start of your next turn, but it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with that, but it makes me wish it was just a little better. I don't see it as an outright bad item. I think it's average. I mean, you do get a choice between 3 items for this item to turn into at the start of your turn, which is not too bad at all, but at the end of the day, the card's just average. B tier. Sadala! This item allows you to steal all shop items after being destroyed. Obviously, this item is more effective the more shop slots there are. If there just so happens to be more than 2 shop slots, it's fantastic. I feel like I've said not much else to say too much, so I'll say this instead. No hay nada que decir. Rengo B. A quarter grants you 25 cents when destroyed. That is good. I hope you can do the math on your own as there will be a quiz next week. Study hard, S tier. Yeah, if you didn't realize, we're reaching the bottom of the barrel here. Mom's Ring is a damage up, and it gives you a loot card when you first get it, just like in the game. This card is S tier. Like all damage ups, it's good. It applies itself, becomes useful in many situations you would find yourself in, performs admirably, works for you. One might consider, Dad's Ring is not nearly as good as Mom's Ring. When you declare an attack, you roll. If you roll a 5 or 6, the monster in question gets -1 dice roll until the turn's end. This item isn't bad, but the fact of the matter is, this will not work more often than not, netting this item a B tier. It becomes much better if you have a way to alter dice rolls, but at this point, I don't feel the need to point that out near as much as I once did. You should know this by now, come on. Pumpkin Mask allows you to search 10 cards deep in the treasure deck and gain 1 of those 10. After that, this card flies to the bottom of the treasure deck, along with the 9 treasures you didn't choose. This item is very good. It is worth taking. A choice from 10 is worthwhile. S tier, thank you. Lump of Coal is weird. After your 3rd attack roll each turn, you gain +1 damage until the end of the turn. Most attacks, let's be real, do not last this long, but I'm sure it's helpful for those that do. I'm placing this item in B tier. I'm not saying it won't be useful, but more often than not, it becomes useful a little too late. Pyromaniac's text looks kind of weird for some reason. Maybe it's just me, but something's just off about that. Maybe it's a different font. Anyway, this card is fantastic. When you gain it, you search the loot deck for 2 bombs, then shuffle. This item increases every amount of non-combat damage you would deal by 1, meaning those 2 bombs in your hand deal 2 damage each. This item is clearly best when combined with others, but even without items to combo, getting 2 bombs that now deal 2 damage each is crazy. That's 4 damage. If you have the loot plays, you can nuke most bosses in the game right then and right there. I know I said only Gnawed Leaf would be the only non-single use item in SS tier, but fans of the channel changed my mind. This item earns its spot in the SS tier. Funny Brimstone is an item that I completely forgot to rank in my last video, and not a single soul complained about this. Guess nobody really cared, huh? Well, I do care, and here it is. Funny Brimstone gives you a whopping +2 damage, which, as you may see, is massive, but most of the time, taking this item is simply not worthwhile. The reason for this is because of its massive 2 downsides. The first is obvious. When you attack with this item, you cannot attack on your next turn. This is really, really bad. Even if you don't kill the monster, you are still affected by this. To make matters worse, each time you deal combat damage to a monster, you must deal 2 damage to another player. Taking this item not only slows down how many attacks you can make, but it also makes you extremely unpopular. Unless you have 3 souls, I would almost never recommend taking this. It's too dangerous to yourself and others to justify their massive damage. However, like I said, its late game power should not be underestimated. B tier. Here it is, my complete tier list for every 4 Souls item currently available. Be sure to let me know what you think, like and subscribe. You'll definitely want to subscribe if you know what I'm working on. That's right, I've got a monster of a video coming out soon. Right now I'm working hard every day, rehearsing my lines, buying new equipment, all that business. With a script a mile long and rigorous editing required to make this thing work, this video seems impossible, but that's just why I've got to do it. Get ready for it, the Inscription mega video is coming, come hell or high water. Take care.